Welcome to Soul Night Live number 57, Memories of Colonel Bruce Hampton, with my guests, Jez Graham and Jerry Grillo. Hey, Jerry. How you doing?
I'm good. How you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for taking the time to do this tonight. I'm really excited about it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I have to admit, I'll be right up front. This is the first stop on the book tour, if you will.
Oh, great.
I'm not going to don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's what this is, but this is about Colonel Bruce, even more than the book, you know.
Sure. Well, this is, a great chance to look back on his life. And I think my timing was perfect. I mean, when I mentioned to Jez I wanted to do this, he's like, well, my friend Jerry just wrote a book about him. I'm like,
and Jez is a big part of it. And between you and me, I don't think I've told Jez this, so I'm glad he's not here. I think Jez is either the first, he was one of the top guys I acknowledge in the acknowledgments when I talk about the musicians who I interviewed, and there were many. He's like the top guy, and partly because he's a dear friend, he's just a sweet guy. The stories are so heart, but not that I used all of it, but like the great heartfelt stories, and he's just a genuine guy, and I just love Jez. But Jeff Mosier, a couple of other guys that Atlanta people you might know who were also like high up on the list.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was kind of reading your intro about an hour ago, actually. So, and the one that Chuck Lavelle wrote as well.
Yes. Cool.
That's great. So yeah, I'm really excited. So let me get Jez in here now and we'll get the ball rolling. Hey, Jez. Good evening.
Hey, Jez.
Jerry, long time no see.
Yeah. It's been a couple days. Hey, did you do the dance party tonight?
Yeah. Sean, the last time we saw Jerry, we were dancing on New Year's Eve to There Was a Time, one of Colonel Bruce's favorite songs, on a Zoom dance party.
Yeah.
And we were dancing to There Was a Time, but the James Brown version. And that was a tune that all the musicians who played with Bruce have played that song many, many times. And we couldn't help but smile thinking about Bruce.
That was the highlight. I mean, that was a great night, but that was the highlight. That song was just so...
There Was a Time.
Made me think of Bruce and...
Love that song.
What a great band James Brown had. Bands.
Yeah, wow.
But I mean, I don't think there was a better band playing. I mean, just person per person, a large band like that. And they just were, of course, he fined the hell out of them if they did something wrong. But,
kind of the blueprint that he wanted, that rhythm section. Didn't we meet hear one of the drummers in Florida? Well, you weren't there, but.
You guys probably did.
Yeah, I mean, that drummer, and also in another genre, but George Porter Jr., the bass player, that was his all-time favorites. He always talked about George Porter Jr.
He played with him. Yeah.
Just the groove that Bruce was looking for. So listening to There Was a Time, though, brought us back to that groove.
Yeah,
that's excellent. That's a great way to ring in the new year.
He was about the groove, and he didn't want, when we'd pull into a club, everyone who's played with him knows this story, but when we would pull into a club, the sound man would want to put all these subwoofers, and, Bruce said, no subwoofers.
Yeah.
James Brown didn't use them. Who else? Hank Williams.
Yeah.
Right? Anyway, he wanted a very back to basics sound on the stage. Very, I was reflecting today on the first gig I ever played with him, because I never really planned on playing with him. As Jerry knows, we were friends, great friends. And he was like another family member, like so many people feel about him. But I wasn't going to ask him to play with him, but he asked me to play one night at Shorty's Pizza. And it was a huge group, probably 9 people. And some of the most amazing guitar players, Steve Cunningham was there, Nick Johnson. There were so many great musicians, and everyone just listened. It was quiet. It wasn't loud. It was very quiet and sensitive. And that was one of the things when you played with Bruce, that people, he had this thing, kind of like Miles and others. You just are on your toes, and you want to make music, and you want to be part of something and not draw attention to yourself as much, but make the whole something really special. And he was able to pull that out of people. And
absolutely. I think that's kind of a big part of what he was about, was making people kind of get out of their own way and let the music come through, and no egotistical stuff at all, and I don't know. I mean, I think that's something that dawns on everybody over the years, just through maturity. But when you're young and you've got chops to spare, sometimes you're just like some bull that's just raring to go, and you got to have somebody kind of go, hold it,
He as a fan, as an observer, not a musician, watching guys like Jez play with Bruce and so many great musicians. It always struck me that Bruce wanted guys who played like Chris Squire and Steve Howe, but he didn't want them to play like Chris Squire and Steve Howe. It was like play it simple, stupid, this kind of thing. And within that, they like, again, Jez and other artists would create this magic. It
was about holding back, for the greater good of the whole thing. He wanted people with chops, but what you're saying, I think, is to be able to hold back on those chops.
Yeah, there was it really added to the tension of the music, especially of a live show. Again, from watching it almost as a dramatic thing happening in a conversation between the artists, is this tension that's happening, in a sense that, I think he loved that, that the release and the tension, of course, but it's just, because you knew any minute. That was something that somebody said that was interesting. Charlie Williams, the guitar player, is it Charlie Williams? Yeah, he does the, he plays.
Bonaventure Quartet.
Yes, the Bonaventure Quartet.
Excellent group.
Excellent group, and a great guitar player, played with Bruce's early version of ARU. And he used to say the thing that he looks for is not necessarily, Bruce used to say vomit on stage, is not that the band vomits on stage, but that there's a threat of vomit, that anything could happen. And it's all contained, within these, these 5, 6, 8 individuals who are somehow containing it. There's a lot of power that's happening there. And it's kind of this magic act.
But there's a big,
I don't know how you do it.
There's also a big release. I mean, you can just freak out for 10 minutes with feedback and, some of the things that were going on.
Yes.
Weird, modern performance art, dance stuff, anything could happen at any time. And so by holding back and waiting for those moments when you can really go out, and
that's what was worth waiting for.
Yeah.
The show was great by itself, but waiting for that moment.
Sometimes it didn't happen, sometimes it wasn't happening, but when it did, really meant something.
I think, and I wasn't there to see this, but I think if Bruce had lost big at the racetrack, for example, the chances of it happening might be a little bit less. I'm just guessing. From stories that he told me, and about the honesty of live performance.
Now that takes me back to a gig in Biloxi. I don't know. I can't quite remember all the details, but he did go missing for a couple of days.
Okay. He loved numbers.
Okay. Well, I wanted to first kind of talk a bit about how each of you met Bruce and came to play with him. You kind of touched a little on that, Jez. We'll go a little more into detail here in a minute.
Sure.
Now, this show is watched by a lot of people that probably don't have any idea who Bruce is. So I'm kind of approaching it from that angle.
Yeah.
If you know him and love him, then you'll enjoy these stories as well, I'm sure. But, it's like... And, he was kind of a mystery to me as well. I'm basically from Kansas City, and I'm a prog rock guy, and moved to Atlanta 25 years ago. It was kind of like being a fish out of water in a way, but it was also really inspiring because in this town, you can play any kind of music you want, and you will find people that love it and play it well. And I didn't find that living in the Midwest. You're lucky to have a cover band that plays at the bar. Forget art. Nobody cared. At least not where I came from. And I lived out in Arizona as well. And it's like, a Motley Crue tribute band will live forever and make great money in that town. But the rest of us, I don't know. And that wasn't my thing. So I moved out here in 96 and immediately found people that just seemed to be kind of on the same page I was, and lots of others that I had no idea about. But I lived in Athens for a while, and I kind of got familiar with some of the jam band scene, I guess you'd call it. And a friend of mine was good friends with Jimmy Herring. He took lessons with him. My friend Chris Henson, my bass player in my band at the time, Dave Snyder, was good friends with him as well. They used to be in a band together. So anyway, they're like, talking about, this Jimmy Herring guy. So I kind of knew who he was, but I hadn't heard him yet. And I ran across a musician friend of mine. I was at some jam one night and he's blaring his radio. And I'm like, who's that guitar player? He's awesome. Oh, it's Jimmy Herring. And it's like, okay, I've heard about that guy. Okay. So cut ahead a few years, ARU's reunited. They're playing at the Georgia Theater. It's before it caught on fire, about 10 years ago or more. And, I was really impressed. It was like, I had the album, so I knew what I was in for, but I didn't know what I was in for. And Bruce was kind of the most mysterious element, it's like, wow, this guy's like, he's like a performance artist and he's a musician. He's just like, what's his story? So, I'd like to know more myself. So that's one of the reasons, I do this show. Sometimes I only do this show about music I love or has touched me in a good way. If I'm not familiar with it, then I don't feel like I'm in any position to talk about it. So, everything you've seen on this show is something that I love, including the music that Bruce is involved with. So I just thought, well, this is a great chance to know more. And you wrote the bio.
I remember seeing you at a gig we did at the Georgia Theater in Athens, another time, a later gig.
You're right.
When we had 3 drummers.
That's absolutely right. I fondly remember that. I was talking to Bill about that not long ago.
And we ran into you outside, I think, or at some pub or something down the street after.
Well, that's what happened was, in case y'all don't know, my band Story of a Life, our original keyboard player was Jez's son, Bill Graham. Okay. And I've been friends with for going on 20 years.
That's how Sean and I met.
Yeah, exactly. I came over and I said,
that's really cool.
I was like, I know your kid's in high school, but I need a keyboard player to play Steely Dan.
Wow.
Like, all right, and it just kind of went from there. And
that's impressive that Bill's playing Steely Dan.
He was, and I still don't understand it. I still can't play Steely Dan.
Really? I'm surprised.
But I like them. And we know the real Dr. Wu, and if he's watching, he used to play with Bruce, and you know him too.
Wow, I got to know more about that. That's like.
Okay, are you talking about Dr. Dan?
No.
Okay.
No.
Bruce has had several physicians in his band. Physicians in his band.
So that particular.
He used to call me doctor all the time. I don't know why, but he used to call me. But Sean, that gig we ran into you at it in Athens was you know why we had 3 drummers at that gig?
No.
Well, sometimes Bruce would forget who all he hired for a gig, so there might be multiple.
And they all showed up
there, so everyone would play, and it was great.
Okay.
I've had that happen, and that was one of the cases. And in that particular gig, there were 2 drummers and a percussionist. It was really nice, actually.
Oh, I remember it well because we were playing around the corner at another club. And it's funny because if you were looking at an aerial view, we were both playing gigs on the same block, the same night, literally. And I remember we went to get a slice of pizza after we set our gear up. And as we're walking by there, the front doors were open and it's like, holy shit, there's your dad and Bruce right there. And Bill's like, yeah, they're playing here tonight. And then you all came by. Well, I don't think Bruce came, but you and Mindy swung by and checked out the rest of our show. And then I think gave Bill a ride home or something.
Yeah, we enjoyed it very much. And I think, Jerry, you want to give a little history on Bruce because you're the historian. Because
sure.
For people like Sean was saying who might not know about him.
Sure, of course. You know what? Just stop me when you've heard this one, I guess. That kind of thing.
Okay.
But, Bruce, the legend is, and it's true, Bruce.
Give me a real short synopsis, and then we'll break into the slideshow and really go deep.
You got it. Well, I'll tell you how, his strange supposed birth. Some people like Flournoy Holmes, the artist, who designed the cover of the book, by the way, and also Eat a Peach, and many, many album covers, including most of Bruce's or many of Bruce's. As Flournoy was saying, Bruce might have been brought here by aliens, right? And I've heard this story before. But he was born in Knoxville, and his birth name was Gustav Berglund III. And his father was Gus, and his mom was from Atlanta. And long story short, Bruce's parents split up very shortly thereafter. His mom was very ill with MS, which they didn't really understand at the time. And he was raised by his grandparents at first as a baby. And a very, very important part of Bruce's story, his first few years, his nursemaid was a former slave, an 80-something-year-old woman whose songs really stuck with Bruce for the rest of his life. I mean, it sort of made a big impression on him. And I think she was with him till he was about 4, maybe. And then he went to live with his aunt and uncle, who he always considered his parents. He always referred to them as, his mom and dad. And so he grew up in Atlanta, in the Atlanta area. And just, fast forwarding a little bit, you'll get to some of this with the slides. He was a big baseball fan as a kid, of course. But he discovered rock and roll. He discovered music. Jez, you've heard this story too, when he heard Little Richard for the first time. Mm-hmm. And so around 55, I guess, 1955 or so, 56. And Bruce's story is, I started doing backflips off the bed. And just it's stuck with him. And he said, I've seen this, and he said it to me, there's never been a rock and roll singer to match Little Richard in Bruce's mind. He says he tried, and Bruce said it was, he was a ball of energy, of course, and Bruce was as well. I think he was an energetic kid, very much into sports. His little brother, cousin, but always his brother, as far as they were concerned, Jim, nicknamed Face by Bruce, who great guy, lives in China now, great gentleman.
Musician.
I was just going to say, a hell of a musician. And Bruce would tell you the real musician in the family. He studied music at, was it North Texas?
He went to North Texas State.
It was North Texas State. So he.
An inside joke. Musicians from the band.
Yeah. There's been in fact, Bruce has played with a couple of North Texas.
North Texas State is an inside joke for musicians in Bruce's band.
Right. Jim Basile, right? No. So yeah, Bruce and Jim became very close, and they were about 8 years apart. And he just had this sort of a Leave It to Beaver meets Lord of the Flies sort of childhood, neighborhood, typical group of boys thing where they played games, and Bruce being a little older than most of the kids, maybe a few years, and then of course Face was very young. He organized these sports. He developed, I think this is where he developed his aptitude as a leader, in a sense, organizing these kids into games that they did for years. To hear Face talk about it, to hear Jim talk about it, these were big events, like, the Millbrook 500, a bike race that Bruce organized for several years, literally 500 laps on bikes that kids coming with bottles of water to help other, Bruce didn't do it small. He did it up big. And
what part of Atlanta did he grow up in?
In the Buckhead area, near Chastain Park.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, not far from there at all.
He drove us by his old neighborhood once on the way back from a gig, and he was being nostalgic for the old neighborhood. Yeah. And
didn't he have? I mean, Bruce had the best sense of direction, I thought, in a car. At least it seemed that way. When I had to follow him, it seemed like he knew every back block.
Stuck in Mississippi looking for some club in the days before everyone had a GPS that worked on their phone. Not so sure about that sense of direction.
I don't know, man. He was magical. It was the same with birthdays. He could get it totally wrong, or at my own experience, I saw him get it right most of the time. Guess birthdays and get it right. But
usually. And Sean, one of your guests later in the month, Jeff Sipe, Bruce was always talking about the two of us have a birthday. I forget, is it a day apart? But it's the same year. So it's either one day, maybe the same day. Maybe we'll find out by the end of the month.
Sipe is one that Bruce mocked mercilessly about sense of direction. There's an interesting, There's an interesting story. It became we'll get to the punchline first.
Asheville, the one about Asheville or Nashville?
Asheville and Nashville. It wasn't even that. It was like it was the rockfish in Athens versus the road something else in Atlanta, and Jeff got the venues mixed up, and he had a mishap. Jeff is gonna. I don't want to tell you this. You got to ask Jeff about this. But
yeah.
Okay.
He was injured. He shows up, and he teased him mercilessly. It became Asheville and Nashville, and then it became Oakland and Auckland. Bruce would tell the story at lunch that the drummer flies to Auckland, and we were doing a show in Oakland. You know.
And also from that same group, you mentioned Jimmy Herring. Sean, do you know about his driving technique that he invented? Is that in the book, Jerry?
It's called the Herring.
Is that in the book?
Yes.
Does he drive with his knees and practice guitar?
Just a thing that he came up with that was very important to Bruce and the band in the way that we got from gig to gig and home. But maybe that should be the suspense that builds up for Jerry's book, because it's a good story.
Okay.
Well, so many people know it. I think that's the one thing about the book, and that's not what I'm going to talk about. But a lot of the stuff in the book, people are going to say, "Oh yeah, I heard this," or "I heard this,"
if they know. But if they don't know, then they don't know.
That's it. And there's a lot of, but I guarantee, even people who knew Bruce for 50 years are going to learn something new in this.
Yeah.
So that's all I'll say.
Awesome.
But regarding Bruce's, growing up and all of that stuff, yeah, he was an Atlanta guy through and through. I mean, even he lived in Florida off and on, but he was kind of like, I remember as a kid in Atlanta in the suburbs, getting turned on to Bruce Hampton by my friend Brantley Lightfoot in high school. Nobody knew who Bruce was. I mean, but Brantley was the only kid who had music to eat. You know, the famous legendary Hampton Grease Band's only album, and it felt like we were, dealing in contraband at the time. The way Brantley, we went upstairs. He turned the window shades down, and he says, blows the dust off the album. I'm going to play this. He says, people will think you're crazy if you like it, that kind of thing. And anyway, and that was my first time I heard Bruce, and that was in the 70s. And it seemed like it was 100 years after that band had existed, when in fact it had only been like 5 years since they broke up. Wow. But so Bruce had become, in my imagination, not knowing much about him because I lost touch with all of that, an institution in Atlanta, and Brantley, my friend who turned me on to him, kind of got that going. I found out that he was, he
was always here. He was always there. Everyone says that all the time, that they never knew of a time in Atlanta when Bruce wasn't there.
Yeah.
And many people say that to me, and I met him in the 90s, I guess. And I don't even remember how, but he was just always there. He used to come to our gigs at the Martini Club where my trio used to play. He would just be there all of a sudden. And we're like, you'd be playing some gig and he would be there, and he was always scouting musicians and wanting to hear who was playing. And he loved all kinds of music. That's another key point I want people to know. He was very versed in all kinds of music. He could talk to you about modern classical music and avant-garde jazz. And really the only kind of music he didn't like was maybe some of the early 60s pop of, he
wasn't a big fan of bubblegum kind of stuff.
But he did love early 60s country.
He did. He liked the music real.
Early 60s country, late 50s, early 60s.
Yes, early 50s, late 40s as well. He liked early country. He felt it was real. One thing about Bruce I found from doing a lot of research, going back to when he was young, like in the 70s, 80s, he had an ongoing theme of today's music is horrid. Music today sucks. They just don't do it like Hank Williams did, or like, Charlie Parker did, or Miles did. He always had an appreciation for, roots, or the roots of music, if not and roots music.
And that's where
he always found diamonds in the rough, at least, for somebody who's not educated in music. He'd find bands that were current and turn me on, or turn you on, or turn people. Have you heard, the Campbell brothers, who play ancient, gospel kind of steel music, but nobody was listening to them.
He said that about the music of today, but the fact is, anytime any musician had the opportunity to go on stage with Bruce, we were making the music of today, and it was very vibrant.
Yeah.
And it was his main word, intent, right? What the intent was behind it. So maybe he was talking about radio popular music, but
he hated it.
Anyone who had the opportunity to play with him made current music that was very present. And it was usually the same songs. It was the same repertoire.
Yes.
That many different bands would do, but you could do different things. And I equated to Miles, jamming on a chord. And if you listen to Miles at the Fillmore, one of those albums, listen to the different sounds and colors within the framework of the groove and the listening that's going on and the cohesion. And you can make something out of very little. You can just take any theme and build something. And Bruce gave us the freedom to explore that, even if maybe we didn't even know that that's what we were going to do. Things came out on stage in the moment that I'm very grateful, to have had that opportunity. Like I said, I never planned to play with him. He was just always a friend. He was always over here, and for cookouts and stuff. We lived nearby, and we, Jerry later will explain about the lunch. I'm sure that's in the slide.
Yeah. That's kind of early on.
Yeah, that was a real big deal and went on for many, many years. Every Tuesday or for a while it was every other Tuesday.
And he had them everywhere.
He had other ones, different days with different people.
He talked to the Wednesday lunch crowd.
And there was a Thursday one.
It's kind of like
a day. Sometimes 3 a day.
Yeah, he would do many a day.
Different places. Or different shifts would come in. You'd finish the lunch, a 3-hour lunch. One shift would be leaving as another shift would be coming in. And he was there picking the turkey sausage off of the plates, right?
I stayed for the duration. And
really? 6 hours?
It was like Johnny was there, Johnny Knapp, who was a dear friend that Jez introduced to Bruce, I guess. Is that the story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Johnny became a very important part of Bruce's life and bands at times, the last few years of their, fun together. And anyway, Johnny was there, and I think I was giving him a ride or something, so I had to stay. And we were there like 3 hours, and I was on a break from work. I used to work at and sorry
all the way, yeah.
If any of my colleagues from Georgia Trend magazine are listening in, that 3-hour lunch I took, it was at the IHOP, right? And so by the end of it, everybody was exhausted. It was just Bruce and myself and Johnny, and I think Zambi was there. And Bruce was like, I have a gig coming up in Denmark, but it's like in a week or something. I have one in Philadelphia. I don't know if you were with that band at the time. Jez, were you guys playing in Philly or New York or something?
I wasn't. No.
Anyway, it was around that. He's like, but I have a Philly gig the next night, and I don't know if I need to do it or not, but it pays really good, and they're going to provide the band. And we were all like, Bruce, why kill yourself, And he's like, yeah, I'm probably not going to do it and all this. And I remember Zambi like, oh, good idea, don't do it. And Johnny and I talking on the way home, good, I hope he doesn't do it because he needs to take care of himself. Couple of days later, you find out, well, Denmark was amazing. I was there for 6 hours and got on a flight and came back around to go to Philadelphia.
He just had to do that.
He had to. That was, he had to.
John, do you know Zambi?
No, I just know that word.
It's an actual person also.
Okay, yeah, I was definitely wanting to get to the bottom of that.
Yeah. What do you call him, Jerry?
He's like a deity.
Yeah,
he's like a deity. Well, Joe Zambi.
Bruce's spiritual advisor, basically.
He is the spirit.
And one of Bruce's great sayings about Zambi is, without Zambi, we're nothing. With Zambi, we're nothing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Bruce once ran Zambi for governor. Like, I think registered him and everything in Georgia. Do you remember what Zambi's, what his motto was? I stand where you stand.
Good.
We'll introduce you to Zambi sometime.
Yeah, let me know, because I thought it was just a mindset.
Well, it is. It is a space in the music that is called Zambi music. There's a space you get into, but he's kind of the
Godhead.
Yeah, he's in the sky above us when that happens. He's pulling all the strings, and Bruce is pulling all his strings.
Yeah.
Still,
definitely.
he still is.
Yeah, he haunts his basement. He haunts his basement. Joe says Bruce is in his basement.
And he's here too, by the way. He's a red cardinal that comes out outside our window all the time.
Really?
Nice.
Maybe not at this moment, but generally at least a couple times a week.
I can't help but feel like he might be looking down on us tonight.
I think he is. That's why we're laughing.
Just the timing of me asking to do this alone is rather unique.
And before we get into the slideshow, Sean, I just have to commend you on your show. I've been able to catch a few of them recently.
Oh, yeah.
I told you how much I liked the Chester Thompson interview.
Check that out. The drummer?
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't forgotten. I love him.
Oh, Chester. Yeah. And you had him opening up about so many things. It was just fantastic.
I can't believe the Trevor Rabin interview.
Oh, yeah. The Trevor Rabin. That's my most popular interview.
That's a rare thing. He doesn't do a lot.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's kind of rare. So the fact
and he was he that way? I mean, he seemed just very avuncular.
Well, you know, it was one of these ones where the PR people go, okay, you got 30 minutes. And then, but if the person has more time, then it's up to them if they want to go long. And he went 90. So I guess he was having a good time.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. And
a lot of that with this book, people, the same kind of thing, like trying to get, I hope they're listening. Trying to get Derek Trucks and Susan Tedeschi, get an interview with them was like kind of get an audience with the Pope, because of the PR people, and they're doing their jobs.
That's true. Yeah, yeah.
And they don't know me.
They came and played with us one night in Minnesota. We had a really nice group: Chris Copley on drums, AJ Gent, small group, and Bruce said Derek and Susan were coming by afterwards. They were playing at the zoo. In Minneapolis. And sure enough, they came by and played. O'Teal was there. He didn't play, but Derek and Susan played. There's a video of it somewhere. It was really sweet, really nice.
And they're cool. They were just the sweetest people. Yeah, I mean, it was
really
just
nice. And that's a perfection for him. And real quick, before we move on, Sean, the other interview I made, I haven't seen the whole thing, but the Todd Zuckerman one really interested me.
Okay.
And there's actually, believe it or not, a very subtle connection that he would not have any idea, but that I could tie to Colonel Bruce from that interview.
Ooh, okay, we're talking about the drummer for Styx since 1995.
And he used to play with Brian Wilson. Brian Wilson, the former proprietor of the Radiant Radish. See this shirt?
There you go, exactly.
Store.
Right.
Yeah. And Brian wrote, our dog Anna gave me this for Christmas. But anyhow, so Todd was talking a little bit about a Brian album that's not as well known, but it's actually one that I really love. And it's not as well known because it came out at the same time as Brian Wilson Presents Smile. So it kind of got lost in the shuffle. It's called Getting In Over My Head. He talked a good bit about that album.
Awesome.
And I loved hearing what he was saying about how Brian was so hands-on about the drum parts and his drum ideas. But here's the connection. One of my main collaborators, a guy named Stephen Kalinic, who's a lyricist that I've done a lot of writing with, and he writes and has written with Brian Wilson and Dennis Wilson and Carl Wilson and a lot of other people too. Anyhow, we wrote a song once and Colonel Bruce recorded it.
Oh, really?
Yes. And Stephen Kalinic wrote the lyrics for 2 songs on Getting In Over My Head that Todd Zuckerman played on. So that's the connection.
That is wild.
And the name of the song we actually wrote the song for Francine Reed, who recorded it, and David Marks of the Beach Boys played on it, and Victor Bassetti, who used to be with Los Lobos. Anyhow, and Dave Ellington on organ. Anyhow, Bruce heard this song. He goes, I want that on my album. I want to do that song. So we cut that song for his album, and it's on his album, Pharaoh's Kitchen. So that's a funny little connection there, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's in the book, but not the connection. The book, the Stephen Kalinic story.
Good.
Yeah, when I was lining up that one with Todd, it's like, well, I'm interested in Styx, but I'm equally interested in him playing with Brian Wilson.
I love that you asked him about that and got him talking about things that aren't talked about usually. Like, that's what I like about your show. You get people to talk about things
that's kind
they don't necessarily talk about in every other interview.
That's kind of my hopeful forte, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't always happen, but I try to. And a lot of these people I interview are people that, you know, I just dearly love their music, and I've read every interview I can get my hands on. So it's like, okay, I want to hear something I don't know. And if I don't know it, then chances are my viewers won't know it either. So yeah, that's always the hope, you know. And sometimes I walk away from these going, yeah, that was great. Well, boy, I learned a lot. And other times it's like, damn, it's kind of like a slippery fish. I didn't quite get what I wanted, but
Right.
you know,
It's like life, right? Or gigs, or right. Sometimes it happens.
yeah, it depends on how much time you have too. If I'm only given 30 minutes, then I just got to pick 10 good questions and get in and out and be done with it. But
Right.
you know, if you go long, then you know, all kinds of cool stuff pops up. So,
Yeah.
so thank you for enjoying it. It's been, you know, I've kind of written about music online since the late 90s in one way or another, and you know, it just seemed like the next logical step was to, instead of speculating about all these people, why don't I just talk to them directly?
That's
On those album picks tonight, Hermit of Mink Hollow. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. I remember when I first heard it.
Well, I got to say, you know,
Great album.
before I knew Bill, I really wasn't down with, I take it back. I had the first Utopia album, but that was it. And I think I met, it's funny, you were talking about Smile. I think that's right about the time I met you guys.
Yeah. 2004 or 5.
2004-ish. Yeah. Because I remember coming over and it was sitting on your kitchen table and we were kind of talking about it. And then we all went and saw it live at Chastain within the year. I remember
2004 or 5. I don't know.
I think, yeah, right around then.
Cold night. Remember, it was cold.
I thought, yeah, I almost want to say it was raining,
It
but
was
quick.
into Pet Sounds in 2000. I don't know if you
Oh,
saw
that was
that.
the one. No, I didn't see that one.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
Smile, and yeah, and the thing is, I don't think I'd ever really heard anything but good vibrations until the night I saw that show.
Wow.
And I thought, well, that's not a bad way to take in Smile for the first time.
It was a really good night. It was
Oh,
a
it was
great
wonderful.
performance. Brian was completely on that night. The band was on fire.
Yeah, and you know, Sukerman's wife, Taylor Mills,
Yeah,
is
she was in the band.
as well. Yeah, so there's
Very
another
good part of the band.
Brian. So yeah, I really have the Graham family to thank for my love of the Beach Boys.
And Mindy and I have you to thank for taking that photo of us at that Todd concert last year.
Oh yeah, that was such a great
We
show.
were on stage asking Todd at concert.
Oh,
Our
that's
video was.
Yeah.
How did that work? We were on video on stage.
Yeah, I think, well, they had a line in the lobby. It's like, if you want to ask Todd a question, get in line. And then they filmed you, and then they picked 10 of them and put them on screen, and he answered the
Somehow
question.
they picked our question, and Sean got a picture of it because I didn't think to even do that. So,
Yeah. It was-
All right.
yeah, so that was great.
Back to the slideshow.
So
right?
anyway, yeah, why don't we go ahead and get the rolling with the slideshow, and we'll go from there. All righty. Let's see here.
Looking forward to the slideshow.
Yeah. And I want to say in advance that I looked for photo credits, and most of the time I couldn't find them. So if you see your pictures, let me know, and I will try and add your name.
Andy Estes
after the fact.
watching. I'm sure Andy took a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Maybe Unknown Vincent.
Like, for instance, this one here is taken by Jeremy Williams, but I must have seen it 5 times without any credit before I finally found one where his name was on it. And it's like, okay, good. Because I want to give everybody credit if I can. So just know in advance if I missed you, I can add it to the notes on the YouTube page later. So anyhow, yeah, this is episode number 57. And here's the cover to the new biography.
That's the cover.
Yeah, Jerry. So tell us briefly what was your inspiration and how long did it take you to put it together?
The book or the cover? I didn't do the cover.
Just the book.
The book, it took all told, it took at least 8 years. Because, I work other jobs, right? And so this was a labor of love and something I did in my spare time, of which I don't have a lot. And so for the first 6 years, it was mainly hunting and gathering, interviewing people. As Jez knows, there were a number of lunches where I'd bring a recorder and I just record lunch,
And you did an article on the lunch, actually, for Atlanta Magazine.
Well, I did an article on Johnny. It was it was focused on the piano. It was called The Piano Man at 85 or whatever, however old Johnny was at the time. But it was a focus on Johnny and the lunch. We got great photos, focused a lot on that as well. That was important. And that was important to John. Yeah. And Bruce made that happen. Jez and Bruce made that happen. Anyway, so once I started going to these lunches, Well, actually, it probably slowed things down. The last 2 years I'm getting to was a lot of the writing. I wrote probably 3/4 of the book or more in the last year, and probably, 9/10, 8/10 in the last 2 years. So I would scribble on it. I'd write like a little bit here and there, but mainly I was trying to gather stuff because there were a lot of people to interview and a lot of places to look.
Sure. Well, and how did you come up with the title?
Oh, well, it's funny. I've heard Bruce say the word mythocracy a number of times. And he would say things like, I prefer mythocracy. One of his famous-ish quotes, I guess, would be something like, I prefer mythocracy to the truth, because it's more interesting. And he was trying to explain his tendency to be the classic Southern storyteller. If Bruce wasn't a band leader, he might have been the guy sitting on a porch. If this was another time, say 100 years, he'd be the guy on the porch telling stories, and kids would gather around and listen to him tell the tall tale. He was a classic Southern storyteller. And so that's what kind of struck me about him, actually. So mythocracy, it was important to kind of have that in the title. And obviously the music, and basically true biography because of some of Bruce's stories. And yeah, he used to say he had his song basically Frightened, but more important, some of his stories, he'd even say things like, this is basically true, and it would go down these rabbit hole. He could tell a story and make it his own, and often that was his own,
Tell him about no eye contact.
Oh yeah. No eye contact. He'd do things like, Jez, this is going back even before you guys played together. ARU guys, I hope they'll pitch in at some point, that one of their rehearsals was like going up and down a stairway because Bruce hated rehearsal. So he said, all right, we're going to do rehearsal. So he drives them to a stairway, an outdoor stairway, and they have to walk up and down without avoiding eye contact. And I don't know if it was ever since then, but he would say no eye contact and give you a pinky handshake. And that was one of his deals.
It was safer that way. It was safer. You never know who's going to make eye contact with you and what that's going to bring. So yeah. Kept it safe.
I guess
pinky, right. No eye contact. And that was just his way. He
had a lot of rules. I mean, like his own, yeah. And I don't know if there were rules or habits, but anyway, it took about 8 years. And a lot of it was interviews on the phone or interviews with Bruce. Basically, Bruce did like to give you to other people. So, he says, yes, you can talk to me. And we would talk. I went to his house a couple of times, or we'd meet at restaurants, strange restaurants to me. I learned that these were regular places for Bruce. So like the Arby's at the end of the universe, stuff like this. And we would do, and anyway, slowly it came together. And
ever meet at Ruby's?
Say again?
Ever meet at a Ruby Tuesdays?
No, but I know he loved them.
Well, one of his lines, if we'd leave a gig and we'd have the breakfast at the hotel in the morning, the free breakfast, right?
Yeah.
And then we'd get on the road, and 5 minutes later, he'd go, there's a Ruby's. Anyone hungry? He liked Ruby's.
So, Jerry, before we go any further, when will this be out and where can you get it?
Okay, this will, and so, so what happened was I finally pitched this to the University of Georgia Press. And it's the only place, I went after and there's a connection there. Bruce's grandfather was the head football coach at the University of Georgia back in like 1910 to 1919. And he actually was the one who established a winning tradition at Georgia. I mean, his teams always won. Colonel Cunningham, he became the colonel. He was actually a colonel in the Army. But anyway, I wanted UGA Press to publish. I was hoping they would. And they were kind enough to do it. It's going to come out courtesy of them April 1st, no fooling, which is perfect. That's Bruce's birth month. He was born April 30th.
Oh, yeah.
But this is, so it'll be out April 1st. I think it'll be available for early orders, maybe even in February. I'm not sure when UGA Press releases its spring catalog. But I think when that comes out, you could probably order the book. So I think it'd be like on all your usual booksellers. I think it'll be available. I know certainly it will be from the university press, but probably from some of the big names who I don't need to mention here, but we know who they are. And, wherever you buy them, that'd be great.
And
the cover really looks good.
Is it a hardback or a paperback?
I think it's paperback. I'm not 100%, but I'm about 88.
I like those better. Hardback books are overly priced, I think.
They are. And this, not to say that this won't be overly priced, because university presses often have a higher price. They're small, independent nonprofits, frankly. But that aside, this beautiful cover was designed, the art was designed by Flournoy Holmes, the artist I mentioned in a conversation earlier. Flournoy designed a lot of Bruce's albums. His most famous is probably Eat a Peach by the Allman Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also a musician and, a good friend of Bruce's for many years. And he offered to do the cover at that party, Jez, that Face threw at the brewery in Roswell.
The birthday memorial kind of
at
thing.
The memorial.
The memorial, yeah.
Yes, at From the Earth Brewery in Roswell.
Sean, we did a tribute. Yeah. I was asked to help put the music together because Face, Bruce's brother, was out of the country when he passed. So he wanted to have a little memorial jam kind of thing. So actually Bill played with me on that, my son Bill.
That was a great show.
And who did we have? Nick Johnson was fabulous.
I think Jeff Mosier played some.
Oh yeah. And Chank was there that night. We got to give thanks to Chank. So that night, so that ties into the cover, is what you're saying?
Basically it does, because I met Flournoy at that party, at that gathering, at that event, and we got to talking, and he says, hey, I'd love to do the cover, or anyway.
The gathering was a lot of Bruce's childhood friends.
Yes.
As I understand it, it was really special to the people who grew up with him, and it was
really cool. Yeah, it was great to see these guys, Sean, who were like Bruce's buddies from that neighborhood I talked about when they all played sports together. Yeah. And all these guys are like 6'5". I don't know if you remembered that, Jez, but it's like you had Face, who was a normal-sized guy. Maybe he's 5'10" or something. But all these guys are like towering over him. It was hilarious.
I do remember that.
But anyway, so that's the story of the cover. Of course, UGA Press also did some of the design, but all of the artwork, the painting is Flournoy. And I like how he got the baseballs in there.
Oh, yeah.
Number 6 on Bruce's shirt is significant. The 6 was a magic number for Bruce, to be both craved and feared. Of course, the card, the ace of,
that one, yeah. And also the nice quote from Billy Bob Thornton.
Yes, that's amazing. I'm surprised. Actually, it's funny that you, I didn't even notice that. I assumed that they had a quote from Chuck on there.
Yeah, and Chuck wrote the foreword, but Billy Bob, Bruce talked about him a lot. He loved him so much. And, we wrote this country song, Bruce and I, and it was Billy Bob's lyrics from Sling Blade. So the three of us wrote this country tune. I never met Billy Bob, but Bruce and I wrote the music, put it together in our garage right here. And he asked me to play an electric sitar solo on the recording. He wanted to have a country song with an electric sitar solo. Of course, I'd never played an electric sitar, but I do the solo on this record.
He knew who to ask, man.
That's awesome. Okay, you had mentioned the times. There's a classic picture here. I'd say that's probably from the last
it's
years or so.
Beautiful.
It kind of reminds me of the night you guys were at the Georgia Theater.
Yeah, with the jacket.
Yeah. So the lunches at IHOP. Tell us a bit more. Which IHOP was it?
This is the IHOP in Lilburn.
On Lawrenceville Highway.
Lawrenceville Highway in Lilburn. And this was for a story about Johnny, who's talking to Jez there, and there's Bruce next to.
And then next to me is the king.
Jack, the king.
Jack North, the king. It's good to be the king.
Yes, he's the king He was the king, maybe still is the king.
Medieval Knights at Discover Mills.
Medieval times.
I think it'll come back eventually, but he was the king. We got to see him there once.
Yeah,
you know how the king got into our lunch group? He was sitting next to us every time, and one time he said, you know, I'm interested in all these things you're talking about. Do you mind if I join you? And then he became part of the group for years.
Yes.
Good guy.
So
he was a great guy.
Did the group vary? I mean, did you have
It varied.
Very quite a bit. You know, I remember when you guys were doing these, and I was intrigued. I was almost tempted to ask you if I could tag along.
Yeah,
I wish I would have asked.
Yeah.
The photographer, and my bad if anybody out there from Atlanta is listening, Audra Melton. Audra Melton took this photo. So I think she took all the photos for that section.
Is that the top of Reverend Jeff's head there, across from Johnny?
Oh, good question.
Yeah.
Could be.
It might be, but you know what? Jeff didn't come to a lot of these lunches at that time.
Well,
later on, that could be a number of guys. Yeah,
there were two photographer friends that were there. Andy Estes, who I know is watching,
sure,
and the unknown Vincent, who everyone knows, and we have them to thank for some of the great photographic evidence. Not this particular one, but so many great photos. So. We really appreciate that.
It's an impressive hairline, whoever it is.
I know.
Dog.
I know. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, wow, Kennedy, you know.
So anyhow, a lot of the book kind of was spawned from these lunches.
Well, certainly inspired. Here's what's interesting, Sean, and Jez, I'll tell you this too. I thought, you know, for a couple of years there, I thought, oh, wow, this is it. This is the book. It's going to be. And I was like excited. This is going to be so easy. All I have to do is tape these lunches, record these lunches. They're all funny, and it'll be great. But you know, it didn't work that way. What happened is I wound up doing all this research, and so the lunches are an important part of the book, and definitely a key part in the book. But so much else grew out of it because of these lunches and getting to know Bruce a little more, and some of these other guys who would show up, who, you know, including Jez and people, you know, I think at this lunch that I interviewed at different times, helped kind of steer me in a bunch of directions, right? Both forward and backwards.
I'm sure you interviewed Zambi a bunch.
Oh yeah, totally. There's an interest. Yeah, Zambi, you know,
Zambi was part of the lunch. A big part.
Joe was part of the lunch,
and Jim Basile, and we took turns driving Johnny, you know, and a lot of other folks did too.
You know,
many folks, Nancy and Barbara and Will, everyone helped Johnny a lot.
Yeah, and
it was kind of a beautiful thing, and it all kind of grew out of these relationships between Bruce, Johnny, all of us.
That's right. I hope that, you know, this is the thing too, Jez. I tell you, this book could have been 5 times longer than it was, and it was threatening to be something like that. You know, before I turned it in, got to give a big thanks to my daughter, Samantha Safin, who came in and saved the day, because it was getting long. And it could be long. I'd be happy with that. And what I'm getting to is it could be just a whole half the book on Johnny. I mean, you know, because Bruce and Johnny became so, that could be a book, that could be a movie.
Next book. How about that's the next one you can expand on it?
Just their friendship was so funny. But anyway, my daughter, I'm getting to the end of writing the book. It was the last 2 months or so, maybe 3 months. And I've still got a couple of 4 chapters to write, or at least finish, you know, some to start totally and then some to finish. I have a lot of work to do, but I'm already over my word limit, right, that the publisher gave me. Or that it was my fault, because when the publisher asked, how long do you think this book could be? I gave them a number, and I significantly underestimated. I had never written a book before. And so it turned out that I was well over that number. And I called the editor, and they said, no, you really need to get it down. You know, we could give you a little wiggle room, but that's ridiculous. And you still have 4 chapters to do. So my daughter comes in and saves the day and heartlessly hacked the hell out of the book and hacked a lot of stuff that wound up on the cutting room floor.
No, editing is necessary sometimes.
Oh, she improved it. She improved it.
That's great that she was able to do that, because you still have more material you can put in another book someday.
Oh, she's just a genius. Anyway, that kid. But anyway, she did a great job of that. But it's a long way of answering your question about the lunch. And look at those guys.
Yeah.
At Music City Roots, Mosier was on that gig also with his band. And there's an interesting thing that Bruce had this thing that happened sometimes where electricity would get altered. You know, he could play a guitar that, in a way around back to this story, but one time we played in New York at B.B. King's, and my friend Gary Lambert brought his guitar down for Bruce to play, which worked fine. And the guitar had all these electrical problems. When Bruce played it, it didn't work. And apparently when Gary got home that night, it worked fine, right? So this gig in Nashville, my keyboard worked just fine. And I was the bass player of this project. I was on left-hand bass on keyboard. This particular gig, there was a fantastic drummer from Nashville, Nick Buda, and it was a tremendous gig, AJ Jan. Anyhow, the curtain comes up, and it's some sort of a broadcast, and I have no sound on my keyboard, nothing. So if you ever see that video, you'll see Bruce play a little guitar by himself, a little solo, and I'm fumbling with my cord trying to get it back. And eventually it came back, but it's something that happened. Electricity flowed through him, and sometimes it could put guitars out of tune, make keyboards not work. And this is one of those moments. But once we got our electricity right, it was a really good show. One of my favorite ones, actually.
Oh, it's a great picture of the two of you.
Yeah.
And what year would you think this was?
12, I think, 2012.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is it like
Mosier, we had a big jam at the end, and Mosier was up. Jim Lauderdale, he was the host of this gig.
Okay.
And you know him from the Holiday Hootenanny.
Yeah.
And then also, I'm just trying, there were so many people that came up on that last. Was that when AJ's father was there? You remember, Jerry? Was that?
I don't know. The only time, Jez, I saw AJ and his dad play was that time at Smith's after the movie.
That's right. I
But
think
I don't
AJ's dad came to the gig. He was at the gig, maybe.
I know he did some other gigs with you guys, but I don't know if this was one of them.
I think he did. I think he sat in on I'm So Glad at the end. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
He's a monster. Boy, that guy. Aubrey Gent is a monster player.
Yep. Father and the son.
Yeah.
all right. So is this like his favorite acts?
Isn't that Denny? Isn't that Denny over there?
That does look like Denny.
Well, I loved every time Denny came to play with us. It was just over the top special.
I
That's
can
great.
imagine.
Yeah. When he came.
Yeah, Denny was fun to watch.
And Bruce loved Denny.
That's a good question, Sean. He had that one was a favorite, but he also had that one with all the carvings in it. Remember that was that was a heavy one. It was beautiful. I can't remember the story. This is the thing. That's why I say there could be 5 dozen books on Bruce, because he had so many stories. He knew about 4% of the world's population. Okay, now 4%.
That's a lot of people.
World's population, and so he had stories out the yin yang and experiences for each, to go with each of them. And so that's why I say, like Jez, I didn't even know how many times you played with Denny, right? I only got to see him play twice. Like Denny Wally, this is the guy who played with Zappa.
At least 5 times that I can remember, and then more times when I wasn't there. So yeah.
And then hearing stories though, like there's so many awesome stories though, like Nick Buda. There's a name you pull out.
Great drummer. That guy. He was Taylor Swift's drummer at the time. And Hank Williams Jr. And Bruce said, he's coming on the road with us. He's going to play this.
and he's one of those guys who, like Bruce has a history with everyone. If he knows 4% of the world's population, he's got a history with 3%. It's like he like Nick Buda. He played with him before, but Bruce had the largest, Rolodex in the world, whatever form that takes, whether it's paper or scraps of paper on his phone. But he knew everybody he could read. Nick Buda, I played with him in 2003. Let me see if he can come to New York or wherever.
And that was in Nashville that time. But that was the thing. You could come and go as well. I mean, so I left several times.
Yes.
And he would ask me back at various times as well. And it was really cool. You know, it was nice. One time, speaking of Denny, one time I came to a gig and I wasn't even on keyboards. I had to come from another gig, and I got there and John Merritt was doing a great job on keys and Denny was there, and they did that song Surrender that we talked about.
Yeah.
That he recorded and Francine recorded. Anyhow, I sang the tune and didn't even play. I just sang, and that was a real rush. I really enjoyed that. And another slide guitar player that played with us, well, he didn't just play slide, but Paul Barrere from Little Feat. One time we went to some festival with Paul Barrere is going to be playing with us. He's going to come and sit in and play Fixin' to Die and Basically Frightened. And when we got there, he was waiting there for us. And I said, okay, I understand you're going to play Basically and Fixin'. And he got so excited. He just said those two songs meant so much to him. Playing with Bruce meant so much to him. He played the whole show. He played on Surrender as well, as a matter of fact, that night. That was in Florida. What was that festival? Magnolia, I think it was.
Oh, yeah, there's Magnolia Fest and Sewanee Spring Fest.
So many random people played with us, like Lou Soloff, who was the trumpet player from Blood, Sweat, and Tears, among other things. You know, he's on that second Blood, Sweat, and Tears album and he's played with Sinatra and Streisand, first call session guy. Anyhow, he used to play with us in New York and here in Atlanta at times. And one time, I just remembered when we played B.B. King's for that after the Allman Brothers Jam, I think it was called the Brothers Jam. It's one of my favorite times because my good friend David Marks came and sat in with us, and Warren Haynes played, and Nels Klein. So I felt really good. We were able to bring together elements of the Beach Boys, the Allman Brothers, Wilco, and David, who I just spoke with last week, told me that's still one of his favorite moments on stage because he told, as David put it, he goes, there was this guy who was handcuffed to this guitar, a Les Paul gold-plated Duane Allman's guitar, basically. And that was a little of an exaggeration, but they brought that guitar in from Macon, the famous Les Paul that Duane used, and David got to play it, and it was a real thrill for him. And AJ was there, and there's a picture of the marquee, and it looks like Jerry Lee Lewis is opening for us. Because Jerry Lee Lewis played at 10 o'clock or 10:30, and we played at midnight. So it made it look like he was it was just nuts. I mean, we didn't get to see him either, but although I heard a couple of the guys got to see him, I heard he was rocking that night. I'm sorry I missed him because I like him a lot.
So I have a question. How did Colonel Bruce become the Colonel?
Oh, well, you know, the story is that he was nicknamed the Colonel as a kid, as a child, because there was a history in his family of military service. Now, one of the stories is, here I am, I get to be the asshole and debunk a myth here. But Bruce used to say how many people how all of his ancestors, his uncles and grandfathers went to West Point. Well, I could find one that did for sure, but they were military guys. His grandfather and his uncle were both in the military. They both served in war and all of this stuff. So Colonel was sort of he was the little colonel when he came along. And so then he didn't take the nickname on stage until like the 80s, until somewhere in it's in the book, but I want to say in the mid 80s at some point, 87, I want to say, he started going by Colonel Bruce. And he always had a thing with nicknames because his first album, he went by Hampton B. Coles.
That's right.
Right. So he'd have different names. And when some of these albums were re-released later as CDs or whatnot, they would have, Colonel Bruce Hampton because that's who he had become known as. But yeah, he was the Colonel at least since I want to say the mid 80s.
Okay. But there was also a difference between Colonel Bruce Hampton and Bruce Hampton. So the guy at lunch tended to be Bruce Hampton.
Yeah.
The guy on stage was Colonel Bruce Hampton.
Right. That's right. Good point. You would know, my man. You played for the Colonel and you lunched with Bruce.
Right.
Probably a bit like Alice Cooper.
Maybe.
Although he doesn't have a different name on stage.
You know who Denny Wally? I asked Denny because he, played with both Captain Beefheart and Frank Zappa.
Yeah.
Knew them both, went to school with them, like knew them forever. And Bruce was often compared, Colonel Bruce Hampton, Captain Beefheart, and also Zappa was part of that conversation, partly because of Zappa's influence on the Hampton Grease Band, is more maybe on the guitarists than on Bruce personally, but very important to Bruce personally. And all of this was wrapped together. And I asked Denny, who was he most like? Was he like any of these guys? And he said he was most like Zappa in how he put a band together and how he let the musicians be themselves, essentially, play what they needed to play.
You have a part in the show, like you were talking, Sean, earlier about it not being all about chops, right?
Right.
So, yes, that's true. But he wanted someone who, there's a time in the show when you show what you got. And Zappa was that way too. You're playing his music, but then when you have your time to shine, you better bring the goods, So Bruce wanted that, And the way he put bands together and the personalities of musicians and getting the strengths out of people, getting things out of people that they maybe didn't know they had in them. Yeah, I see that comparison.
Interesting. Because I just thought that, because I have to say, even to this day, and done with the book, I'm still trying to figure out some of these things. Like, it's hard to describe somebody who, did so many things, I guess.
I don't think you're ever supposed to figure it out.
Oh, I agree. I appreciate the journey, but
the journey.
But that's it, man. And he's constantly an interesting guy to me.
That stage thing and Zappa, I think that's another thing they had in common. You better, like, when you're on stage, it's serious business. What did Bruce always say? Don't take yourself seriously. Take what you do seriously.
That's right. And
no matter what gig it was Carnegie Hall for him. It was Madison. It was the worst dive. Didn't matter.
You're right. He called it the Super Bowl, Jay. He'd say, I deal with it like it's the Super Bowl.
It was.
And this too. He didn't want anybody to get high or have a drink or anything before the show or during the show.
Anyway, it was total presence, total focus at all times.
I mean, it's an interesting, because didn't he say something like, hey, would you want your dentist to come to work, after he's had a few belts,
Maybe some laughing gas.
Yeah. Did the no eye contact also, was that true on stage as well?
On stage, you had to, if you took your eye, Jerry's the sports guy, I'm not, but you can't take your eye off the ball.
That's it.
Right? So you couldn't have your eyes closed. There was a rule that you couldn't have your eyes closed on stage.
Oh, but he closed his eyes.
That's fine. It didn't apply to him.
Exactly. And he was clear about that, I think.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Another rule, here's another rule in the van. No music.
Yes.
Music, ever.
Here's a story that one of the guys, and I can't remember if it was Sipe or somebody who could really tell it better, but one of the things was you'd put on the radio and Bruce would scream at it and yell, liar, if the music, it was like a top 40 station, liar, and Sipe told me it was something, if it wasn't, like a old, African-American blues musician or Prophet Omega, he didn't want to hear it,
He didn't listen to a lot of music.
No,
he wanted silence, actually.
And
talking.
Yes, and he preferred live music anyway.
Right. He listened to music live, and he scouted players, and he was always out checking out what was happening. Did I ever tell you about when we played on Elvis's porch? Did you ever hear about that?
Oh, do tell.
Yeah, we literally played on Elvis Presley's porch in Tupelo, Mississippi.
That's wild.
So it was a show called the Back Porch Sessions, where they had people come onto the porch.
I did see this.
Where Elvis lived as a kid, where his father built this little house, so we're driving there, and there's a couple jogging, and we get them, we slow down. We're lost. We were always lost in Mississippi. And Bruce asked them, do you know where Elvis's house is? They had no idea. And we were a mile from Elvis's house. They had no idea where Elvis, or had never even heard of it. But somehow we made it there, and we sat on the porch and we did the song. We didn't do an Elvis song because Bruce was not an Elvis fan, but he did that song, speaking of gospel and blues, Right Now. We did that on the porch. Right Now. And I played cajon because it was supposed to be unplugged. So we just had some, Mike Hinton was on percussion, AJ.
Oh,
And then they wanted to do an interview about Elvis. And I wish I had the quote, but Bruce told them Elvis was, I think, the top pole vaulter in the world. And that's what he liked best about him. And they were just so confounded. But that was a really good memory, just sitting on Elvis's porch, singing Right Now.
That was awesome. That
Yeah.
was awesome. All righty. So why don't we go way back here?
there he is.
Nice.
Yeah. How old do you think he was in these?
Wow, I would say, yeah, I think he's, probably about 5 and 8 or something in these, 5 and 6 and 9 or something. Yeah, this would have been around the time he was getting into the picture on our right would be around the time I would guess he was starting to get into music or hearing it for the first time, because he would have been about 8.
Yeah. So
when
what
that
year would you say that was?
I'd say that'd be 1955. That looks
Okay.
like probably 1955 picture. Both of them are in that. And look at the Davy Crockett shirt.
That's how I was trying to figure out who that was.
So when was that, like 54? So maybe he's like 7 and 9 here or something. But yeah, that would have been right around rock and roll birth era when he was getting into music.
And can you guys talk a little bit about what the music scene was like in Atlanta way back when, he was going down to the Royal Peacock and all that? We'll talk about baseball here in a second, but
Yeah.
I wish
I was reading your book about how he was riding his moped down to see people like, Muddy Waters and folks like that at the Royal Peacock.
Moped?
Yes, he would drive a moped down. God, I'll be honest with you and say I am not the guy to talk about Atlanta music history, but from what I can gather, Bruce was always interested in, like the R&B type of music that made your ass move, and he just, Little Richard caught his attention pretty early. There was who was the blues artists?
Bland and Hubert Sumlin. Those are two.
Oh yeah,
favorites.
Hubert Sumlin.
Bland.
As he started discovering Howlin' Wolf and these guys a little bit later, as Bruce got into his early teens and 14 years old or so, he really started getting into it. I mean, he always had that sense in the back of his head from what he said and from what we could figure from his caregiver, Liza May, who became actually a lyric in one of his songs. He does a song where he's singing to Liza May, basically. But anyway, building on that, as he goes on into his teens, he starts getting into blues music and into jazz, into some really into Coltrane and into just all kinds of. I'm fumbling over my words. I need to look at my own book over here and read.
Jerry, wasn't he involved in booking jazz club? This is before we lived here, but he used to talk, and I've heard other people talk about a club where he would bring in McCoy Tyner, Weather Report in the early days. Is any of that in the book? There was just someone who's watching this would know.
Yeah, somebody who's watching this should raise
some club that he was involved with bringing people into. And also on this Royal Peacock, under Sam Cooke, Lots of Papa was a local musician, blues singer. I actually did a gig with him once that I recall I had to arrive at 2 a.m. And the gig went from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. possibly.
Right.
Yeah, it was a really fun gig, actually.
Well, some of the songs that he did, like for his whole life, just about like Fixin' to Die, was one. Was it Bucka White? Am I pronouncing it, Mr. White?
Also on the first Bob Dylan album. Did you know that?
I mean, he loved John Lee Hooker. Bobby Blue Bland was like his hero. Otis Rush, the Kings. That was the stuff that he was digging into.
He wanted the groove. He wanted that groove. He used to say, if it's grooving and they're dancing, you can really play whatever you want, basically.
But
they're up on their feet, basically.
But then as a listener, when he did listen to music, he liked digging into stuff like Ornette Coleman. Sun Ra was a huge influence for him. And, again, you look at some of the songs that Bruce did, the Sun Ra stuff. But like, Coltrane, of course, he was into a lot of stuff.
He
I guess
loved a piano player named Art Landy, who I actually used to study with. And it was one of those odd connections or not odd connections, but wound up being a really good friend of Bruce's, and they talked baseball a lot. And Bruce always said he thought Art was just the greatest, one of the greatest living pianists. And I hadn't talked to Art since 1981. One day, Bruce walks into our house and he's on the phone with Art Landy and put me on the phone with him. And, he was a real important figure in my life as a teacher. And it was really great. Thanks to Bruce, I was able to reconnect with him. It was sweet.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to tell folks that might not be familiar with Atlanta a bit about the area that the Royal Peacock is in.
Yeah.
This is in an area we call Sweet Auburn, which was a predominantly black neighborhood pretty much until it was gentrified in the last 20 years. This was a regular stop for pretty much the soul circuit back in the day. So I'm sure
a lot about it.
Had a chance to see the cream of the crop in this place. And the beautiful part is it's still there. I don't know of anybody playing there currently or if they even do shows there anymore, but it's great that it survived. And as you can see from the picture at the bottom, not everything on that block did. So it's kind of cool that it's still there.
He made friends, Bruce made friends there, I think, as a kid. He was able to get in. James Alley Pat Patrick, the former disc jockey, the Atlanta disc jockey, legendary. He remembered Bruce from, that was one of those things that there's so many stories, right? I mean, we heard you could go to one lunch and you hear a lifetime's worth of amazing stories, right? But then part of my job, I thought, was to check some of it out, right? See, okay, what's real, what isn't. Not make a big deal out of that, because that's why it's mythocracy and that's why it's basically true. I'm not trying to tell anybody that I'm doing a William Manchester job here of biography or something. But anyway, it's these stories, trying to bring them together and when you find those little kernels of truth, it's like a treasure. So I found out that this stuff was happening. Like Bruce was going to the Royal Peacock and meeting this guy, Alley Pat, who remembered him and then would meet Bruce's friends later and correct Bruce or some. No, it wasn't Jackie Wilson. It was, it was McCoy Tyner that night or whatever. He would say something and you'd see these things come together and it's like, wow, this really happened. It's like piecing together the history of baseball or something.
I know the feeling, I'm a big history buff and I'm really interested in the history of Atlanta, 1870 through about 1920. As a matter of fact, I'm writing a book that may take me forever, but I'm actually working on one myself about the mansions on Peachtree Road.
Nice.
Because, you drive down Peachtree Road nowadays and it's nothing but skyscrapers. But 100 years ago, some of the most amazing houses you've ever seen lined that road. And I'm kind of working on a coffee table picture book of that kind of stuff.
Well, I'd heard that somebody was also working on a book about Atlanta. I think there've been a number of Atlanta music books, but one specifically about recording studios, about some of the bigger studios. I think there's a book. Somebody's working on that. And I don't know. I don't want to throw names out there or put projects on anybody's shoulders that they don't want. But there's some people who I'd love to see write books about Atlanta music history. And hell, I'll name them because I really love their writing. Doug DeLoach is maybe one of my favorite music writers in Atlanta. He's been doing it here for 30, 40 years, whatever. And yet he still has that youthful look. And Tony Paris, of course, at Creative Loafing should do a book. He probably will. I don't know. But there's some greats out there who have been covering Atlanta music forever. And, that's never been me. That's one thing I want to make clear, too, is, this was a Colonel Bruce Hampton book, right? And so I tried to approach this. My background was in business writing and in just general journalism. And my interest in Bruce was through baseball initially. I mean, it was baseball trivia.
Well, hold that thought because I'm about to segue into the very thing. About 15 years ago, I found myself working at a Borders on Ponce de Leon. And while I was working there, I started investigating the history of the neighborhood. And I quickly realized that I was working in the outfield of the Ponce de Leon Ballpark.
That's right.
So that alone was pretty damn fascinating to me. And I remember at lunch, I would sit there and look at the Sears building across the street. And this is now what they call Ponce City Market. It's been amplified and gutted and turned into really expensive food courts and shopping centers and all that kind of stuff. And I'm glad. I love to see people repurpose old buildings like that. So it's a real triumph on that level. But just sitting there, you know, where have my car parked out there on the field, basically, I just kind of, you know, it's fun to just kind of look around and visualize the ballpark around you. And I think there's a video of Bruce on YouTube where he goes to the spot, like before they built the shopping center.
Yes.
He's just in the middle of the field talking about the park. So I figured it had a really strong connection to his own personal history. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the ballpark and what it would have been like going there. I think it was there until about the late 60s when they built Fulton County Stadium. And then this was the home of the Atlanta Crackers.
Yes, the Atlanta Crackers and the Atlanta Black Crackers. There was a Negro League team who played there as well.
Right, and this was before Cracker was considered a diss. You know.
Well, you know what? That's what honest to God, I'm a baseball history nut in many ways, but not enough of one to have. Or history nut. I just don't get it. Why would you want to be called the Crackers? You know, it's something I never understood.
I think it was like, you know, a crack outfit, you know.
That's exactly right. It was firecrackers.
That's what it was a compliment.
It was more about that. And, But then when I used to hear Atlanta Black Crackers, it always had a weird sound to me. But these were legitimate teams that were good teams. They had tremendous ball players. It was like AA minor league baseball. I sometimes it was the highest level of minor leagues. Sometimes it was the next tier below that. And with regard to what they used to call the Negro Leagues, it was probably the same thing. It was like the next tier. So like Satchel Paige might not have played on the Black Crackers. You know, he was the next tier up, that kind of thing. But they had great history, two great teams at different times. Bruce went to, you know, this was the first live baseball that he saw in his life. But he used to listen to it a lot on the radio as well. He liked listening to the major league games coming out of St. Louis.
What were his favorite teams?
Back then, the Cardinals, he liked the Cardinals because back in the 50s when he was getting into baseball, you know, before the Braves came to Atlanta, the Cardinals had a pretty, you know, it was like one of those 500,000 watt stations that some days or some nights you can pick up their games. He always liked Stan Musial, you know. And what's interesting is, you know, Billy Bob Thornton was a baseball guy as well as a kid. You know, he still likes the game and all this. But him and Bruce connected on that level as well. And they were both Cardinals fans. You know, for Billy Bob, it's because he grew up in Arkansas and that was the closest major league team. And for Bruce, it was because, you know, when he was a kid, that was the team he grew up listening to.
Very cool. Well, here's a few kind of aerial shots. And there's a very famous story of Babe Ruth hitting a home run where basically, you can't see it, but there's a railroad track right here. It's basically the belt line now is there, which is a sidewalk where yuppies walk their dogs every day and people jog and all that. It's a cool thing, but it kind of takes you through the back side of this part of Atlanta because originally, you know, it's the backs of warehouses and stuff and trains would pull up to them. Anyway, supposedly a train was passing by and Babe Ruth hit the ball into the back of the train. And so, you know.
Well, you know what? That is a legendary story. And Bruce tells that one in that video you reference. It's a great, I urge you guys, Jez, if you have not ever seen that, if you've not seen that video of Bruce telling the baseball stories at Ponce de Leon.
Yeah, where he's standing out. Yeah,
it's hilarious. The actual guy, and here I am being the doofus again, trying to ruin a good story with a fact, which I know is dumb. But it was Bob Montag. For all you big Atlanta Crackers fans out there, Bob Montag is the guy who also supposedly hit the ball.
You're right. I think Babe Ruth merely hit it into one of the magnolia trees.
I think so.
And
magnolia tree out there.
And you know what remains in this picture? The magnolia trees. They are still there. As you walk down the Beltline, you will see the very same magnolia trees.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, if you pull in behind Home Depot, which is right about here, you can see the tree. And there used to be a plaque, but some asshole stole it a couple of years ago. But yeah, the trees are still there. So that's about it.
That's if I had it, it's one of those things. It's weird, and when somebody invents a time machine, my plan is to go back to see a Negro League game back in that era, because I feel like some of the best baseball never seen by masses was played, and you're just now hearing about. I would love to be able to talk with Bruce about this, right? And it's one of those many things I'd love for Bruce to be here to talk about now, because Major League Baseball just recognized the Negro Leagues as a major league, which is, I think, is a great thing, because these guys were forbidden to play for the best money, in the big cities and the best circumstances. And the numbers were ridiculous. The things that they did, that they kept track of, and anecdotally, it's ridiculous. And so if I could go back in time and see a ball game, it would probably be at a place like Ponce De Leon Park with black crackers against somebody from Jacksonville or whatever.
That would be awesome. And a little bit of extra history. Before the park, there was actually a lake here. And this road that goes along here with houses along the edge there, you can't really see it on the postcard, is called, I think, Lakeside Road. And of course, you drive down it now and you're like, what the hell are they talking about? A lake. But once there was a lake here before they built the ballpark. And across the street where Ponce City Market is, the Sears building, that was an amusement park called Ponce De Leon Amusement Park or something to that effect.
Really?
So, now you know. Okay, I said it right. I'm not Southern enough to say it right all the time, but it's Ponce De Leon.
Yeah, but you got your Atlanta history down, bro.
Looking forward to your book, Sean.
Yeah, I'm ready to write a book. Definitely. Well, I know this area because I worked in Inman Park forever, and I find Inman Park to be a fascinating neighborhood. It's where all those Victorian houses are that have all been restored, and it's just amazing to drive around there. So I'm always digging up information. As a matter of fact, somebody found a picture of a giant mansion on the corner of Elizabeth and Edgewood, where I've been driving by it, and I looked at like aerial maps from 1910, where they actually literally draw the houses on the map. So I could tell that there was an amazing house there, but I didn't know much about it. And then one day this picture surfaces, and it's like, just, it's like peeling back the history and the layers of time. And it's like, wow. So yeah, I'm totally into that stuff. So anyway, moving on, should we talk a bit about Bruce leading into the Hampton Band and how he wound up hooking up?
Sure. He was, there's a number of different stories about this, and I try to share several of them in the book. That Bruce, the first band that he played with was an outfit called the 4 of 9, and they were called that supposedly because they had a habit of showing up for 9 p.m. gigs at 8:56. So they called themselves the 4 of 9. There's a number of stories about how Bruce got into music. He shared several of them, and they're all funny.
But he would never, that 4 of 9 thing, I mean, that must have made an impact on him, because you had to get to a gig very early for Bruce.
Yeah.
Hours early.
Yeah.
Like 6 hours early. So he would get there 6 hours early. Easily.
And right. And I don't know how true this is, but this was why. But the 4 of 9 was a band that Harold Kelling, need to talk about Harold, because if Bruce had a mentor, in his age range at that time that got him into this crazy business, it was Harold Kelling, the late Harold Kelling, who was a great musician, a big fan of the Ventures and instrumental guitar music. There he is, biting the guitar. And also, frankly, and I think people who've known Bruce a long time would say that Bruce also and Harold was influential in Bruce's sense of humor, I think, and probably the way Bruce approached, maybe the way he approached music or anti-music, as they used to say. Bruce was the anti-musician in the band, but Harold was a terrific guitar player, and he kind of was the kind, I guess, in a sense, the de facto leader of the band. It's kind of the sensitive issue sometimes with the Hampton Grease Band there, but Harold was the guy, was the big brother, if you will. And shortly thereafter, Glenn Phillips became, probably Harold's equal as a guitar player. Shortly may be putting it mildly, but of course, Glenn, you don't need any introduction from me, Glenn, right? Glenn is one of the great guitar players.
Absolutely.
And he quickly became one. And that's the amazing thing. If there was a person who was, I don't know, born to play guitar or something, it must be him, because he was 16, I think, when he took it up, 15, 16 or something, and quickly became this great player and composer. So Harold and Glenn became kind of the musical, center of this band. Bruce became the front man, and this all sort of gravitated from the Four of Nine when they broke up, and then the Grease Band formed a few months later. That kind of thing.
Great drummers of all time, Jerry Fields.
Jerry Fields, yes,
incredible, and also he's a great tabla player, great human being, great teacher.
Yeah,
really, really amazing person.
And Jerry and the band, the guys that became the main band, the guys who recorded the album, slowly came together. It was initially Glenn, Bruce, and Harold. That was the band. And the two other fellas in the band, Glenn's brother, on bass, and another fella playing drum. So they went through different lineups until they solidified it after a couple of years with Jerry, or a year or two with Jerry, and then Mike Holbrook on bass. And those were the five main guys. And that became the Grease Band, sort of, the first string lineup, if you will. And that lasted for, several years.
And that's the group that opened for Frank Zappa at the Fillmore.
No, actually, it's not. Here's the interesting thing, Jeff.
The John Yoko thing? That wasn't that good?
That was not, because Harold left the band before that gig. Harold was the band that recorded Music to Eat, their only album, right? Their the legendary album. And Harold and Glenn wrote, probably all the music there, 99% of it, whatever. And then they shared, Harold, Glenn, and Bruce were, shared the lyrics. And Bruce was known as sort of the memorable front man. People who saw the band, they remember the crazy front man. They remember the guy who was wacky, who would scream vocals until his mouth bled. You thought it would bleed, and would swing from rafters and would scream names of friends. Look at him there. And look at how athletic he was. I mean, he's got ups. He's up in the air. And, he was a real character. He became a performance artist. And I think when I read articles about the band, guys talking about him, he was a key part of that band. And his name is in it. But he wasn't the band leader per se. Right, it wasn't Bruce that was calling the shots, this kind of thing. I think that was part of the issue. I think is maybe they needed one guy to be the John Lennon.
who took Harold's place when they played?
When they went to play with Zappa, they had having a senior moment here. They had a piano player with them. They hired another guy, basically. They didn't have two guitarists.
It's funny, Sean, there's a little Prague tie-in here, which is nuts. But Bruce used to tell me, I don't know if it's Mythocracy or not, although Jerry Fields verified it once, something about Roger Powell used to have some connection with them or worked at the studio. Maybe he was an engineer at the studio, maybe jammed with them. There was a connect, and Bruce, because he knew how much we love Todd, right? And in fact, when we played at BB King's, there was a big poster up of Todd because he was coming there the next week. It was a real thrill, playing there the month before. But Bruce used to call Todd Ozzy Osbourne. Because apparently he was at some festival with him once, and he walked up to him and said, "Ain't you Ozzy Osbourne?" But anyhow, he swore that Roger Powell had something to do, and Jerry Roger was the keyboardist in Utopia, an incredible pioneer of synthesizer. And isn't that? I wonder if it's true. It could be Mythocracy. I don't know.
That's a good question. So where did they play back in the day, the Grease Band?
Oh, like the Great Southeast Music Hall. They played at a number of the coffee shops in Atlanta. Let's see.
Wasn't there a place that people played in the hotel down across from the Fox?
I think they did. That's the Georgian
Terrace. Yeah, there was a ballroom in the bottom of it.
Let's see here. I was just looking up. It's late at night for Jerry. I was looking up some of the.
Not that one.
Glenn or somebody weigh in. They used to play a lot especially before they started touring out, I guess, in that section of Peachtree that was, it was kind of like the mini Haight.
Didn't they play at Piedmont Park?
They played Piedmont Park all the time. Piedmont Park, they made the free, that was the free shows that Glenn started when he plugged his radio in one day at an outlet and realized that they had, electricity, and within a few days they were doing live shows. So yeah, Jez, that's exactly right. They launched that.
It was the equivalent of the Golden Gate Park kind of vibe.
It really was. They brought. They brought the Allman Brothers.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah,
but they played. They would play. Then after a while, they started playing up and down the coast. I know they played up in New Jersey. They opened for Alice Cooper. They opened for. There's a legendary show. They opened for Three Dog Night. They opened for the Grateful Dead. They've shared bills with the Allman Brothers.
Is a Three Dog Night story in the book?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
in
there.
All-time stories.
You were talking about Atlanta's Haight-Ashbury, and I think you're referring to basically Peachtree Road from 10th to about 14th Street.
Yes.
Back in the 70s. Just a bunch of, nowadays you'd call it a strip mall. Yes. Back in the old days, it was just,
I think
little shops and such.
It basically had a head shop. But it had a scene. I think there was a little scene happening in the sense that, hippies from out of town, for example, maybe who didn't know the area would go there because they had heard, and they might be disappointed. Or
all live together.
Right? They might be disappointed or they might be hungry, right? And so there was a scene, and there were some people who were like, I guess you'd say, philanthropist hippies who helped these people out, right? And help. They were homes, and there was one guy who basically helped the hippies out by feeding them. He started doing soup kitchens essentially in Piedmont Park. So Jez, when the Grease Band would be playing, right? I asked this guy, "Did you ever see the Grease Band?" He says, "No, but I heard him a lot, because he was working. He was feeding the hungry while all this was going on in the park, right?" And what's interesting is how he was able to do this. He funded his operation by selling nickel bags. So he was poor when he showed up in Atlanta, and somebody said, "Hey, I can pay you, a few bucks if you could sell this dime bag of pot for me."
Bruce didn't condone that, though.
Right. Bruce didn't know anything about this, no. But this was the scene anyway. Part of that.
Where was this? Where he's up in the air?
The Strip. It was called the Strip. That area of Atlanta, the 4 or 5 block area of the Strip. Yeah. There was like Middle Earth Head Shop, and and then there was I'm trying to think of the name of the clubs. Like there were a few like coffee houses that were. The 12th Gate was one.
That's the one that he mentioned that he used to bring McCoy Tyner into.
Yes.
That's the club.
That might be Jez. That I'm not sure what Bruce's role was in bringing McCoy Tyner there.
He was involved in some way in these shows.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, he was probably, but McCoy definitely played there, and so did the Grease Band. So you had this strange, mix of bands, right, playing it. And the Grease Band, I guess anywhere the Grease Band played, they were going to be...
Did the Geese Band play there? The Hampton Grease Band?
You know what? I think they did.
Yeah.
The Geese Band played a few big shows, because after Bruce, left the Grease Band, right? And Jez knows why. He went to try out for Frank Zappa.
That's right.
Tell me what happened there. There's a funny story about what.
I'm waiting to read your book because we never really talked. I mean, we knew the two of us had some sort of connection with Zappa, but it turns out until you told me that he auditioned, right?
Yes.
And he didn't make the audition.
But you know what his comment was?
I know the comment, but his comment. And I also auditioned for Zappa and didn't make the audition, but had an incredible experience. It was nothing but good. But Bruce always told me that he told Frank, "You need someone with chops. I have a chop." That's what I always heard.
Yes, he did that, and he downplayed it. And but you know what? That was the end of the band.
He loved Frank so much. I mean, and that's something we used to talk about a lot. How Frank, like Colonel Bruce, there's the public image, the person that does the interviews and that's on stage, and then there's the person that's the down-to-earth person that you can have a meal and talk with, and that was a really nice connection that Bruce and I had. And I always felt that way about Bruce. I only knew Frank very little and only spent a few days around him, really, but it was such a great experience. And I just always had a warm feeling about him, and I still do. And Bruce had such a warm feeling about Frank, always.
The Catacombs was the other place I was trying to think about in the area. That were two of the main places in Atlanta. But yeah, Piedmont was huge. I think that helped really build their following. And yeah, the story about Three Dog Night is legendary because Bruce told it many different ways. And
it's really happened, do you think? Was anyone there?
Here's the thing. I've had a number of conversations with other guys in the band about that, right? And so let's just say the stories like I heard at the IHOP didn't jive with the stories.
Yeah,
one of the things, and that's what makes it funny though. And Bruce never claimed to be he never held his hand up and put his hand on a Bible or whatever. He was always having fun with these stories. He didn't care if Jez or myself or all these other guys heard the same story 5 times, 5 different ways. It was just
the stories were a vehicle for improvisation, just like the lunch was a form of improvisation.
They really were, and in a sense,
stage and all of these things are connected, and it's all creativity and improvisation and form and content and intent.
And his mind was he had this fertile mind, and he wanted.
So what happened? I don't really know the history after that. He left.
Basically, Bruce got the basics of it right. I mean, they played at the in Tuscaloosa at the new basketball arena at the University of Alabama, and they came out playing the stuff that they normally played. Right, the stuff that they like to play. It's like there was a Ventures song. I think they opened with a Ventures song, and then they played one of the songs that they wrote for their album. And these were long songs, and they were complex. And some people, sometimes people loved them or hated them. Right?
Halifax, was that one of the songs?
I don't know that Halifax was one that pissed off the crowd, but it was from that album. It might have been Evans or Six. Six is a great one too, but I don't think it was Halifax. But whatever it was, it pissed off the crowd, and they were booing. And Harold basically yelled at them and said, "I'll kick your ass," or whatever. There was words, and they start throwing shit at the band, and they're throwing rolled up cups of ice and stuff, and it got ugly. I think they cut the gig short, But the stories that that was kind of funny. Bruce each year would add a new appendage. And at one point he was like, he was saying, I think, he says, Grillo, I think George Wallace and Bear Bryant were in the audience too, and they're the ones that got the state patrol to give us a ride out of town and that kind of thing. He made it sound like this epic. It was ugly, but then you talk to some of the guys in the band, and it was funny no matter how you look at it. What Glenn Phillips said that I thought was hilarious was, he says, what was funny to me is we were just playing the stuff we like to play, and it infuriated a bunch of people, which I think that's awesome. They really stuck to that was the thing I like about the Grease Band.
So nothing about them doing Three Dog Night songs.
No, they didn't do.
No, the story was that they went out and played Three Dog Night songs right before Three Dog Night came on stage.
Right.
And they did Grease Band versions of Three Dog Night songs and got booed off the stage and had to leave. That's the story I remember.
That's the story I heard too, and that didn't happen. But I like to believe
it was a good one.
It's a better story, and also. But here's the thing: like most of Bruce's tall tales, or all of them, there's a thread there.
I think Bruce would have liked Three Dog Night. Their drummer Floyd Sneed was killer, man.
But back then the Grease Band was
pop for him, probably.
Oh no! Listen, in the back then the Grease Band was all about, I think, getting a reaction, and at least Bruce was,
So he went, did the Zappa bit, and then what happened? He went on to another band.
Then he formed the Hampton Grease Band.
Before we go that far, what's happening here? Is this where they're signing their record?
Oh, let me see. This is a staged photo. That, from what I understand, this isn't an actual signing, because this has got Phil Walden in it, and and there are people in it who aren't in the band. But like what you had, this is like a staged thing. This is sort of a famous picture.
Okay.
Well,
here's the album. Talk a little bit more about when this was done, and do you know where it was recorded? And
it was mostly recorded in Atlanta, some in New York. It was interesting because what happened was the story I share in the book, how it became an album. These guys had already recorded some tapes in Atlanta with a friend of theirs, I think, and I'm going to blow the name so I won't mention it. But, it was a bunch of material, and almost none of it commercial, right? It was, and that wasn't their intention, all right? It was all about intention anyway. Their intent, that wasn't it at all. But anyway, they had this material, and then they played in the Atlanta Pop Festival down in Byron, right, at some point. And a guy from Columbia had gotten hold of these tapes, and he was going to put together, like, he didn't know if he was going to do a Hendrix album, which of course has since happened. He was going to do maybe a live album from the Atlanta Pop Festival. He was trying to consider what to do with these tapes. And there was another guy in the room named Tom McNamee, who became the producer or the co-producer of this album. And Tom, by the way, I urge you to, and Jez has seen, if you haven't seen it yet, Sean, check out Bruce's documentary, basically Frightened, the documentary. It's really well done, fun,
a
lot of funny stuff. It's funny stuff. But anyway, Tom is in this documentary. And Tom told me, and I love this because this isn't in the documentary, but he's listening to his colleague hear tapes from the Atlanta Pop Festival. He's hearing Hendrix and all these legends of the day, and he hears this crazy stuff. And his friend who was listening to it says, I've had enough of this shit, and he turns it off. And Tom's like, no, turn it back on. I love that stuff. I love it. It was the Grease Band. Who are these guys? And his colleague was like, if you want to listen to this, listen to it on, get some studio time, and then you listen to it. I've got work to do, right? And he finishes what he's doing. Tom books some studio to go listen to it, and he loves it. He loves what he hears, and he talks Columbia into going down to see the band, basically. And he goes down to see them in Atlanta, and I can't remember if it was Catacombs or the 12th Gate, but I think it was one of those two. And he just loves the band, right? And Tom had studied some music in college, right? He comes with a great sheepskin. I think he went to Yale. Tom went to Yale, right? So he studied music. He studied under, legends at Yale, and he knew a lot about music and theory and also literature and poetry, all these things. He loved the band. Mm-hmm. He convinced Clive Davis at Columbia to do this record, basically.
Can you imagine Clive Davis listening to that music? Can you imagine?
He freaked out. He listened to it. He said, "This is shit," and he hated it. And so Tom says, "No, they've got a real following. You got to," and they did. Or you got to go listen to these. Go talk to people who know, that kind of thing. And so apparently, this is what happened. Is Clive Davis heard from people that he trusted or something. Okay, they got a following. Let's sign them. And they record the album, or frankly, some of it had been recorded, but they finished the album, and basically Clive and his minions are like, this sucks, and it's, there's nothing on here that we can sell as a single or any commercial viability anywhere, and the one song that is about screwing and whatever. Anyway, everything from that perspective, right, was working against the band, and they basically shelved it. The story is that it was the second worst selling album in Columbia history to a yoga album. That's the legend. Right? That goes around, and that may be true.
Yoga instructional.
Yeah, yoga instructional album is the only thing that sold worse. That's the story, and it sounds like something Bruce would have said, but that's sort of a long-lasting story. It precedes anything Bruce would have said. So
was that the one album they made?
It's the only album they made. It's a double album, and it's got 18, 19-minute songs on it. It's Yes would have been proud. It's like Tales of Topographic Oceans on steroids. But it's like, I mean, of course, it's nothing like this. They're completely different. But what is similar? Go back to that word, chops. You've got two ridiculous guitar players, an insane percussionist in Jerry Fields, an incredible bass player in Mike, and this album. I mean, to me, there are parts of it that are like, as Glenn will say, if you want to end a party, put on this song on the album or something that'll end the party quickly, right? So there are some songs like that, I guess. It's not for everybody, but it's grown in popularity and appreciation since disappearing off of store shelves. One reason it disappeared back in the day is supposedly Columbia didn't put any money into marketing this, and they were disappointed with it or something. And the story was that you could find this in comedy section with Don Rickles records, and that kind of thing. That it just wasn't. And the band, frankly, I heard also one of the stories going around is that they signed a pretty big advance, like $75,000 for 1970, 71, for a double album. They got, but all that to say, the story is that they didn't see much of that. There's stories going around. I don't want to cast any aspersions on people, but there have been reports. There's plenty of news out there, and it touches on it a little bit in the book, but the Grease Band didn't make a lot on this album, and there certainly wasn't a lot spent on trying to push the album, right? So when they played the Fillmore East and got incredible reviews from the people who were there, people from Columbia even, like not Clive Davis, but the next day, if you were a fan and wanted to find this record at your local record store, it was difficult to find, right? Because they had either disappeared. Or it was in the comedy section, but at any rate, it was just a lot of bad luck, because by all accounts, their Fillmore East shows, which again came some months after the record, killed. I mean, there's a story in the book. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the guitarist Mark Rebo.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Tremendous player. He was at this show. He was a kid, and he's a high schooler, and he's experiencing some chemical nirvana. Let's put it that way. But he's at this show, and he's got a terrific memory of it, because he mentioned some things that, like, I had to ask about, like, who was this guy? But anyway, he was at the show, and it was incredibly influential for him. He said more than the Mothers of Invention, it was the Grease Band that he remembered, and that had an impact on it.
One thing I never understood, and Sean, you showed a picture, and we didn't discuss, that had Joe Cocker. And I never understood the thing with, there was Joe Cocker in the Grease Band, and they were playing the Fillmore.
Was it the color picture? Let me see.
A little back, yeah. There was,
Joe Cocker. I was going to say that before, Jez. This is a trick photo. This is Joe Cocker's Grease Band.
Right. So
yeah.
They were at the same time, though. I mean, because I used to go to the Fillmore a lot, and I wasn't at the show with the Hampton Grease Band and Zappa, but I saw Joe Cocker. I saw Mad Dogs and Englishmen for sure.
Well,
Maybe
that's
not-
why they became the Hampton Grease Band. One of the stories is because Joe Cocker had a band called the Grease Band,
right.
and so
Woodstock, and that was the same era.
they called their band the Hampton Grease Band.
Do you
And
think
the other
people got
story-
confused by it? Maybe it was
Jerry Fields told me a funny story. He said part of it was, of course, again, it all came down to Joe Cocker had a band called the Grease Band. Jerry tells me it was natural to name it after Bruce because he worked in a gas station in a grease pit, essentially. He says it was perfect to name it the Hampton Grease Band.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and Grease, Bruce loved Grease anyway.
Grease was this concept
if it didn't have Grease, it wasn't good.
Yeah. And it's weird, Jez. I don't know. I could be off base, but my own opinion and assessment, whatever, as a writer in this book, is that Grease was the earliest version of Zambi. You had Grease, and it eventually evolved into becoming Zambi, as sort of a mindset.
I see Grease more as the funk. It's more of the groove. The Grease is in the groove.
I guess.
The Zambi is something else. But, it can go over the groove. But you got to have the Grease to start with. If the groove isn't there, nothing else is ever going to happen. And
but he also had butt level consciousness. So, is it Grease or is it butt level consciousness? I think what happened is Zambi embodied all of that. He tried to, each one built on the previous one. And in my opinion, Zambi means different things to you guys in the band on stage and us guys in the audience watching. Zambi is that big, and that right. That's the impression I got of Zambi.
Do you want to show Sean and his viewers the Zambi salute?
Are you ready?
And you at home, Andy, and whoever's watching, let's all do the Zambi salute.
Let's do it.
Zambi, Zambi.
3 times, right? 1, 2, 3.
Zambi, come on, Sean. Zambi. Make Bruce happy.
Somewhere an angel is earning its wings.
That's right. Good.
Awesome.
That's great. That was the Zambi. And what was funny is if Joe Zambi would say something that would get under Bruce's skin, which was funny. Joe knew how to do that. And if he did it, Bruce would do a reluctant, like a mean Zambi. He would be like this. It was like he was struggling. It was.
And if Joe ever walked into the IHOP, an entire table of 12 people would do the Zambi salute as soon as they saw him. Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. Joe's and
make a real fuss. Draw a lot of attention to our table.
He has a great sense of humor about all that.
All right, so I guess.
And the band also too. Some of the guys designed, like Harold, had something to do with the design of the album. He did some drawings. And,
great album cover.
Yeah, there was some input from a few people, but yeah, I love that cover.
Very cool. So moving on, Harold left and they called it the Geese Band.
No, Harold left and they played the Fillmore East as the Grease Band, but they had. I'm really having a senior moment here, fellas. I'll give you the name.
Wasn't Roger Powell, was it?
No. Jez, if I say the name, you're going to know who it is, dude. You're going to know. Yes.
And it wasn't Roger Powell?
No, it wasn't. He was Stigler.
Stig O'Hara from the Rebel?
No, not Stig O'Hara. Oh, my God. I'm having a senior moment. I'm embarrassed. I wrote about it. I probably had to misspell his name before I understood who he was anyway. Anyway, they had to bring somebody in who was more of a classical pianist, right? And he filled in that part. I don't believe Mike Green was with them for that show. But Michael Green, you guys know Michael is a heck of a player. Sax plays, he's multi-instrumentalist. He used to run the Grammys. Mm-hmm. Michael Green, who ran the Grammys for a while, but he played in the Grease Band after Harold left.
Right. Oh,
and he played with them like when Harold, actually he was, as Michael put it, I was I was with the Grease Band, but not of the Grease Band. So he would play with them a lot, but he was not a regular. And I think he did play regularly with them after Harold left. And then Bruce left about 2 years later, right? They played 2 years worth of gigs without Harold.
So what year would it have been that Bruce left?
Bruce left in 73.
That makes sense because Sean, with the whole Zappa business, Bruce used to tell me that he was hanging out a lot with George and George Duke, my favorite keyboardist. And I was trying to place the timeline, and I figured maybe Bruce was around there after Ricky Lancelotti, who sang 50-50 on Overnight Sensation. They had that really great wild voice. And before Napoleon. That's how I've kind of put it together. And I think 73 ties into that pretty well, doesn't it?
It seems about the right time.
Yeah, because wasn't Roxy in 73?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Sid Stiegel.
Don't know him.
Sid Stiegel was a piano player, and he had actually helped, I want to say, chart some of the music, back when the guys were not 100% able to write.
Fun charts to see, yeah.
Right. So he was a big help for these guys, I think, especially for like Glenn and I don't know, maybe Jerry and Mike and these guys. But again, they had this monster outfit. And you think about it, though, they had two kind of lead guitar players, and that got cut in half when Harold left, leaving that to Glenn, right, who's a great player. But it completely changed. Think about how it changed the sound of the band now. I mean, with you get Mike Green, who's like a keyboardist saxophone player, right, and a little bit more of a jazz type of aesthetic and all. It's just a different sort of sound, right? And so, at any rate, Bruce decided to leave. He thought he could make it with Zappa, would like to try, and the band broke up. And I know it pissed off maybe so, like it usually does in any band, but I think everybody got over it, moved on with their careers. And
so the Geese Band was next?
And then Bruce formed the Hampton Grease Band.
There's a clip of that in the movie, basically Frightened.
Yeah.
And it's a little more jazz-oriented, as I recall.
Yeah.
And
that's interesting, Jez. The band that they show in basically Frightened as the Geese Band is the same band that became Bruce's band, the Ice Age, the new Ice Age, right? That the Hampton Grease Band started out as a larger outfit. It had like horns and
the clip has a guy who I actually did a little bit of playing with when I lived in the Bay Area named Paul McCandless, and he's on that clip. He was in the group Oregon.
Oh yeah,
great musician, and Bruce used to talk about that band, how much he liked that Geese Band, and and playing with McCandless. And now was Jerry Fields in that band also?
No, Fields wasn't. Trying to remember who the drummer was.
Jerry Garber have some connection? Did he introduce them or something? Possibly.
He might have. I mean, the comedian Bruce.
I'd love to have seen that band. I really love that clip of the Geese Band.
Well, that Geese Band clip is basically the new Ice Age essentially, but it was the latter part of the Geese Band. That Carl Ratzer on guitar. Who is a just insane player. Was it Dan Wall, the piano player?
Oh, yeah, he loved, Dan
just
Wall.
A great player. I think David Earl Johnson played sometimes with them.
Oh, you know that name, the conga player? There's a connection with Jan Hammer. Remember the first 7 days, that Jan Hammer album?
Oh, you were the
great album.
One. Yeah.
And David Earl Johnson's on percussion.
Oh, okay.
He wrote one of Bruce's songs, right? Didn't he write Time Is Free? He
wrote a couple of them. He wrote like Time Is Free. He wrote the music for Trondasa.
Yeah.
I'm pretty darn sure that's Bruce's lyrics because Trondasa was Trondasa was a real person in Bruce's life. And it's one of the few songs that, in my opinion, hell, I have almost a whole chapter on it, but that's one of the few songs where Bruce, in my opinion, is as real as can be. In terms of, he's talking about a real person who broke his heart, whose heart he probably broke. It was a relationship coming apart song, and it's what's amazing about that song is he recorded it twice with two different groups, like 6 years apart. And then Jimmy Herring played it in part of his set. Like, did you guys see the John McLaughlin, Jimmy Herring show in 2017 at Symphony Hall? All right, well, Jimmy's band played an instrumental of Trondasa, which is just killer. It's just moody. It's beautiful. And almost made me want to cry. It was like just so well done. And Jimmy had that as part of his regular set list, I think, with that outfit. That whole show was nuts with McLaughlin.
I that one. I had to work that night. I heard great things about it. And, that's funny, though, about that song. Bruce didn't want to do it. I learned it, actually, because we were going to pick up some of the older tunes because we generally didn't do those. And I learned it and we practiced it. And he said he didn't want to do it.
Mm-hmm. Some old songs he wouldn't do. Well, I
didn't want to go there.
I met the woman who I met Trondasa.
Okay.
And she's in the book. But, there were a couple of stories about her. But anyway, I think I met the real Trondasa. And what kind of made me feel really good was like, wow, she told me a story about Bruce guessing her birthday when they were like both 20, like when he was a kid, when they were both kids, when they met. And I'm thinking, because I've always wondered, how long did he know how to, how long was he able to do this trick or this magic, if you will, whatever. How long was Bruce doing this, right? And she basically cleared it up for me. Well, at least that long, at least since he was 20, 21.
Wow. Very cool. All righty. Well, let's see. I'll go back into this. You sent me a few pictures, and I don't recognize everybody and every one of them, including this next one. Let's see here. Here we go. Who's this gentleman?
That's Jerry Fields.
Sure is.
That was Bruce's wedding, and I wanted to just get a Jerry picture in there somehow, but this was a picture that somebody had lent me. It's not in the book, but they did lend it to me to consider for the book. And this was Bruce's wedding, 1972, 73. I'm trying to remember. But
okay.
yeah.
That's pretty good with the timeline then.
And Jerry conducted the wedding. Jerry was the one who performed the wedding. But this is Bruce from like the 70s, late 70s, I guess, late Bronze Age era. And like this picture, I'm not sure who took the one of him performing, but the one of him holding the invisible cigarette was taken by Flournoy Holmes.
He loved the invisible cigarette and blowing smoke.
Okay.
That was his thing, wasn't it?
Yeah. Did he ever smoke cigarettes? Do you know?
He did. He smoked them like crazy. He had to, he quit for health reasons.
Yeah.
He did smoke for a long time. Actually, you're right. Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, bump it ahead a little bit here. Aquarium Rescue Unit is probably his best known group that he put together. Tell us a little bit about how that all came to be.
Man, again, I'm the guy who's just simply telling this story. There are people who were there who can say what they saw. But here's what happened. Bruce built what I call in the book, and it's kind of a running joke throughout the book, but not really. It's a joke, but it isn't a joke. I keep referring to them as the best band anybody ever heard, because I heard that from a number of people who were musicians, right? Who were talking shop, who heard this band and said, that's the best band I ever heard. And so the joke, and again, it's not a joke, but it is a joke. This was his 1927 Yankees. I mean, this was Bruce's, he had that in mind, I think, when he was building this band. Basically he started working it out in little 5 points.
Was it the point or the pub?
He played it was at the Point, and it was at the was it the little 5 Points pub, and
yeah.
what was he anyway? They started they started playing what essentially was a jam session. When you hear Jeff Mosier and some of these cats who were there talk about it, it was like a jam session. But then you started seeing some of the same people show up, and Bruce had, like, I think the earliest guys were like Sipe might have been the first guy. That's what's funny is Sipe tells a funny story about the first time he met Bruce, and I'll let him tell it. I mean, I don't know if that's going to be part of the show, but whatever. So he was the first guy, I think, of Bruce's outfit on those Monday night gigs. And then he got Charlie Williams to come along, and like O'Teal, right? Before Jimmy. And one of the stories that I heard from, was this from Jimmy? This might have been from Jimmy told me this story. He says, yeah, Bruce asked Sipe, do you know any guitarists? And he says, I know two of them, because he was jamming. Basically what was happening while this was going on, Sipe and Jimmy and Charlie and O'Teal were all playing on the side with their own little band. They never did a gig. They just practiced, and they were called Mysticus or Mystificus or some strange band name where they would, they were just joking on each other, but they were a killer band. And so meanwhile, they had a real paying gig going Monday nights with Bruce, some of them. Bruce says, who's a guitar player? And Jeff says, I know two of them. And Bruce says, well, who's the craziest motherfucker of the bunch, basically? And he says, oh, that would be Charlie. And so I think that's how I think Charlie wound up in the band at first, and was great. Everybody who saw him. And then at some point, Jimmy joined them, and they had two guitarists. And at some point, Charlie dropped out of the scene, and Mosier joined the band.
Isn't that Matt Mundy, the mandolin player?
Yeah, I'm getting to Matt. What happened is Mosier joined the band, and then Mundy was the last piece, basically. And Mundy was kind of like, I kind of cast him as the secret weapon, because when you hear about, and again, I'll admit it, I wasn't going to the Horde tours. I wasn't part of that scene. I didn't know a Matt Mundy from a Mamas and Papas Monday. I just, listening to this guy's stuff, he blows my mind. I mean, I've loved mandolin, but he's beyond that. He takes it to another level. And I remember hearing it for the first time and saying, who the hell is this? And somebody saying, well, that's Matt Mundy from the Aquarium Rescue Unit. Who are they? So putting the pieces together, right? But the people who saw this guy said he was the secret weapon. The guys from Fish,
you can tell from the recording. I mean, you can hear it on that recording.
It's insane. And then Count and Butu.
And remember what Count said? It's in the movie too. When Count went to meet Bruce for one of those Monday night gigs, and he had never met him. I forget who told him to go by there. Someone else can fill that in. And Count saw this guy messing with his congas. And he goes, don't touch those congas. That's, these are expensive. What are you doing? And that was Bruce. Yeah. He didn't know. He
thought he was a homeless person.
Right.
He had it, he had the shirt untucked. He probably had a mustard stain.
Count was a secret sauce in that group, if you ask me as well.
But Count was like another guy who was the DH. He was not there all the time, but he was a monster, and he was a secret weapon. Then Count was kind of a cool guy because he was the only one close to Bruce in that age group, right? They were sort of the grand old men of the band. And Count was a voice of reason. So like if Bruce wanted to make a change with the band, or, hey, tell so-and-so not to show up, he'd try to get Count to do it or something. Count didn't like doing that stuff. Nobody likes doing that.
Speaking of which, Count's been having some health issues, and there's a organization, is it called Down for the Count?
Yes, Down for the Count. If you all can look up, I was going to get to, thanks, Jez. They got to look.
He could use some assistance. He's really done a lot for so many people with his music, and his great.
But Count was in the band, in and out of the band. I mean, but he was, because Count had his own thing going on as well, right? He was not. He had his own life happening, but he was with the band, and very important part of it, especially some of those early years. But then Mundy, he added that North Georgia twang that was interesting, and flipped people out. And of course, he was the last. He joined after the Count and all of that. Yeah, Mosier. I think the Count might have even joined after. He joined after Mosier. So anyway, but that was kind of how they put it together. How it came together.
Very cool. And they did a few different albums.
Yes, they did.
This one's huge. You know, this is just like one of the cornerstones of the Southern jam scene, I would say.
Doesn't Chuck Leavell play some keyboards on that album?
Yes, Chuck Leavell is the keyboardist on this.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. God, yeah, this is such a really good. And this is the thing, you know, you don't have Count on this because, again, Count was kind of like the DH in a way, but Count was at that. That was an incredible show. That was the show that Billy Bob Thornton was there to. I believe he was there filming it because they were going to do a documentary on widespread panic. It was a series of shows in Athens that Panic was playing and ARU was playing, and they brought Johnny Sandlin in, you know, the Capricorn guru, and he recorded it. And he said he had a really hard time picking what to leave off the record because it was every bit of it was so good.
And that album did pretty well, didn't it? It was pretty popular.
It did pretty well. It did well enough so that Capricorn did another one, you know, and this disc was very well received, got great reviews. You know, I don't think it made the band very rich, but it definitely kept them going a while longer. And you know, critics loved it, and it just kicks. I mean, there's some songs on there that. You know, they're otherworldly. I mean, they really pull some rabbits out of their hat. And what's interesting is Chuck Leavell had never rehearsed with them. He just showed up and basically...
That's pretty much how it was done a lot of the time. You know,
that's right. But Chuck didn't know that.
He's such a fine musician.
He's so good. And he didn't know that. But so he had like O'Teal was like telling him when there would be a, you know, whatever, a chord change or something to look out for. And, you know, he's like, Chuck was like, God bless O'Teal. You know, he helped me. He says, but also he said it was the most fun he had ever had. You know, this is a guy who's been playing with the Rolling Stones for, you know, 40 years almost and was an Allman Brother. And he's like, those gigs. He says, playing with that band was so much fun because, as you said, Jez, he's such a good musician and he liked being pushed that way.
It was funny when we played one of those New York gigs, and the Stones, I guess, were rehearsing at the time. He goes, "Yeah, I talked to Chuck. Mick's coming to the show tonight." One of the Mythocracy things. He didn't come to the show. I think they were busy rehearsing. But no, I think that version of Basically Frightened on that album is pretty much the definitive one.
Oh, that's great.
I played it a million times with him. I love that original. I mean, not the original, but the version on this album. That O'Teal does a beautiful solo where he sings along. I love that.
Yes.
But we did basically with Lou Soloff in New York, and he loved that tune. And one thing, speaking of Chuck getting cues from O'Teal, we were playing Right Now at BB King's. No, I'm sorry, I was here in Atlanta at Smith's Old Bar. And Lou Soloff from Blood, Sweat, and Tears, the trumpet player, he was a brilliant musician, he kept coming over to me and asking me what the chords were. And there's only 2-3 chords maybe. And I just I didn't know if he was messing with me, but it was in the key of E, which isn't really a trumpet key. And there's one unusual change. It's not a typical blues, but I just thought it was funny that he kept asking me what the chords were, this cat, on this song that has 3 chords. I think he was messing with me. I think Zambi had gotten to him, perhaps. It could have been it.
Zambi did
it. All right.
So they did another album that followed it up a few years later.
It was that Mirrors
of Embarrassment.
Yep. It's a good one too.
Great record. That is a great record. Again, another one where, you know, I mean, it doesn't have the live urgency on it, but Johnny Sandlin did some really wonderful things in the studio. This is a great record. It's hard for me to pick a favorite. I think I probably lean towards the live one. But I really like this one because, you know, it's one of the things Bruce was not known for as much for studio records, even though he had some really good ones. You know, he loved live performance, and I do too. But I mean, this is just a sweet record. I think it stands up with a lot of, you know, I love that you were talking about fusion earlier today because I was thinking about how sometimes Bruce's bands, especially this one, sort of had that. And part of that was having Jimmy in the band, being such a fusion head and also an influence, and having a drummer like Sipe who can play anything. Like, okay, here's Sipe playing, like he's Chester Thomas. You know what I mean? He's just could play any kind of. He's all over.
They could go anywhere stylistically. It was really
yes, and there were times when I listened to this band that I thought, God, this is like, I've heard Return to Forever. I've seen them and all this, and this is on that par. With a crazy, Southern fried singer. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that was what appealed to me from the get-go, coming from that kind of background. It was just like, oh, here's a fresh dose of this, and it's local too. That's cool. I got to know more. I got to see this in person,
Did you ever see Return to Forever, Jerry?
Yeah. Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
And Sean, you saw them probably the reunion, right?
I saw them in 1977. I saw them. The first concert I ever saw, or 76, was Return to Forever.
Damn, Jerry.
So Romantic Warrior? Is that when?
Yes, but you know what? I never saw them since. I saw Chick Corea play with Herbie Hancock. He did the two of them on piano.
Oh, those were great. Yeah.
I saw Chick play with I want to say it was a show with Gary Burton, but
those were incredible too.
But I wish I'd seen Return to Forever, like the shows you referenced. I heard those.
I saw Return to Forever in '73, I think, with Bill Connors.
Yes, he was
And
great.
so one summer in Massachusetts, where I lived at the time, there was a place called the Music Inn, and in one summer, these are some of the shows that one summer: Return to Forever, and Herbie and the Headhunters.
Wow.
Weather Report.
Whoa.
Mahavishnu, they all were there that summer. And Weather Report had Greg Rico on the drums from Sly. He never was on one of their albums, but he toured with them that summer. But anyhow, and then I did get to see Return to Forever again in '74, but not since then. I didn't get to the shows or any of that.
Well, in '73, I saw my first grade teacher, and she said, "Put those crayons away. It's recess."
You're a little younger.
Yeah, but I did see them on some of their reunions. The Romantic Warrior lineup about 10 years ago now at Cobb Energy Center with Dean Nola.
Was that it wasn't the one Dweezil opened, or they?
No, I saw that as well. That was at the Fox maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Yeah. Dweezil Zappa's band.
Didn't get to see it either.
And that was the one where they had Frank Gambale instead.
John Luke Ponty. That's
and
right.
then John Luke Ponty. Yeah,
I wish they'd get that was nice, very nice. But I wish they'd get Bill Connors back.
I really would have liked
Bill Connors was awesome, man.
Yeah, well, he was an interesting guy. His style really changed a lot. He kind of turned into kind of a Holsworth wannabe later, but early on, he had his own thing going on. And it was amazing.
Unique sound on that first return. What was it called? Into the Seventh Galaxy.
Into the Seventh Galaxy.
Yeah. The guitar was so soulful.
Yeah, that was like the first one that had any electric guitar on it.
Yeah,
I loved all those albums, Light as a Feather, and all that.
Yeah, that's right. They had a couple of earlier, and actually, Music Magic was a great one.
Did you see that lineup in '76? That's crazy.
That's the lineup I saw.
See, when that came up.
Thank you. You jogged my memory. That's the lineup I saw.
When that came out, it was like to diehard Return to Forever fans, it was kind of hard to accept that at that point.
I loved it.
But going back and listening, it's probably fantastic. I missed Lenny White and Al Di Meola at the time.
Well, that reminds me of, you ever heard Inner Worlds, Mahavishnu?
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of an odd duck in the catalog too.
There's a song called Planetary Citizen, I think, on there I used to like.
Inner Worlds?
Yeah, that's actually cool. And there's like one where he just spazzes out with the ring modulator for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Soloing and stuff,
You know the McLaughlin album that's my favorite one of all of them? It's called Electric Dreams. It's by the One True Band.
Yeah.
It's got El Shankar and a great keyboard player, Stu Goldberg.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's great. That tune, The Dark Prince, is just
that's on Giant Steps kind of thing. And there was one, Love and Understanding, that I love. The bass player sang, Fernando Sanders.
That whole band was like another level. Some people prefer them to Mahavishnu. And John.
There was something about that group, because it merged the elements of Shakti. It kind of brought that into the electric.
Yes.
Right. And more
Fernando Sanders on bass, or was it T.M. Stevens? I'm trying to remember.
I'll have to look it up. I don't think it's T.M. Stevens though.
No, it was Fernando Sanders because he sang, and he played with Jan Hammer too, I think.
And just the way John played on that was so different than the way he played in Mahavishnu. In Mahavishnu, he almost went for this more raw kind of thing.
And that was fantastic as well.
Yeah, and
there was something, I don't know, there's something majestic about that band that when you hear them, even when I heard McLaughlin's band a couple years ago, that was something I'd never see. I had never seen him, and I've been waiting to see John McLaughlin forever. You know, that's like, so that was a huge thing for me. But like, they did a lot of Mahavishnu, and
for the first time, right?
Right.
John had.
Oh my God, it was epic when they started playing the Lila's
Dance.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Dance of Maya.
Beautiful. You know, he had Gary Husband on keyboards, you know.
Yeah, and it's funny, that song always had that feel, almost a Vince Guaraldi feel with the piano at the beginning and end of it, and then this like pyramid of sound in the middle. It's just
yeah.
Did they cover Dance of Maya in that show? Did they do that one?
I want to say that was in there. Yeah.
We used to love. And in the first professional band I played gigs with, I was also in Massachusetts in Stockbridge, Lenox, this band called Ball of Confusion. And we covered some Mahavishnu, but it was from the album Apocalypse, the second
one
with Narada.
Yeah.
Anyway, the drummer in this band, some people watching might know, named Kenny Aronoff. And I always tell people I learned a lot about odd meter from when I played in this group, and we would count these tunes and learn to subdivide, and was working on those songs from Mahavishnu. We also did the entire side 2 of Billy Cobham's Spectrum album.
Oh, nice.
At our gigs, at these gigs. Yeah.
I love that record.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, back to Bruce here. Let's see what
Bruce got to play with McLaughlin, didn't he? At that some event. What was it?
Yeah.
Something on that tour he got to play. There's a picture. They all had the guitars behind their back. Sean, what's the guitar maker? Paul
Reed Smith.
Yeah. It was an event for his guitars. That's
it. And it's funny because McLaughlin had played a show with Mahavishnu was with the Hampton Grease Band many years earlier. And one of the guys in the Grease Band, Michael Green, he had met McLaughlin. Anyway, years later, he says, and McLaughlin, he says, do you remember that band? And he says, oh yeah, I hated those guys. They were crazy. Right. And then fast forward several decades, and it's like, you know, John McLaughlin's like, oh sure, I'll play with you guys.
Funny how everything changes.
Yeah, things turn around.
So here's a picture many years later.
That's the reunion band.
That's right. That was their last reunion. That tour. They did that like about an 8-week tour, 6-week. Remember that, Jez? Bruce was going to the lunch, and he
shiny shirt for Bruce. Would they have a wardrobe person or something?
I don't know, man. But look, you can still see his undershirt.
Like a rock star.
It's still untucked.
You can still see his undershirt, though. So it's still Bruce.
But this was at the Georgia Theater that they shot this, and there was maybe the only press conference that the ARU ever did, because I remember going to that. And
yeah, you know, the Georgia Theater is a biggie, you know, in this whole scene. It's like everybody that's anybody has played there.
Yeah, and it was special thing to play there. It was a real special feeling.
Really was.
You can tell that this is post the fire because the walls kind of charred. They just kind of left it, I think.
So, Sean, did you get to see that show? Was that in Athens?
I remember just standing outside with the guys and watching it for about 10 minutes, you know, on our way to get a bite to eat. Oh, I mean,
the Aquarium reunion, or you saw them with McLaughlin?
I've seen them a couple times in the last 15 years.
But you saw the one with McLaughlin.
I saw that, but that was more like the Jimmy band.
Right, that wasn't Aquarium Rescue.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, he did Jimmy's band toured.
Invisible.
That wasn't Darren. It was Darren in that group. Jimmy's group.
I don't know if that was Darren's. I don't know if was Darren in the Invisible Whip.
I think
he might have been. He might have been.
Great
Yeah, I
drummer.
can't quite remember now. There was I recall a keyboardist that played violin as well.
Oh, right. That's from the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there might have been another, maybe Matt Slocum also was in there.
You're right.
And,
You're right.
And then it was Sipe and Jimmy and who was on bass? It wasn't O'Teal, I don't think.
Kevin Scott, I think.
Yeah, Kevin. Of course.
Kevin Scott was on bass.
Is that the Invisible Whip, though, or that's something else?
Yeah, that's what it's called, the Invisible Whip.
Well, they had
Darren's the drummer of that group. I'm pretty sure.
I'm trying to remember. They did the other band, Jimmy's band, the 7 of 9. Remember that?
Maybe that's the one I'm thinking.
I think that came along right after that.
The one with Rick Lawler. The one with Rick Lawler.
Yeah, that's his most recent band.
Okay, that I didn't get to hear them, but I really liked
I haven't either. I'd love to see them.
Really intrigued by that lineup.
They were all former Bruce guys. The band was entirely guys who had played with Bruce.
Yeah, I believe the Invisible Whip was a name inspired by Bruce as well, or maybe
that's Bruce
something he
used
referred
that
to.
phrase
Darren was one of Bruce's all-time favorite drummers.
Yes.
And he was with him to the end the last several years.
Great drummer, man.
On the groove with.
There we go. And there's probably a picture from one of the reunion shows, I would think.
That's the reunion show, one of them.
Yeah.
There they are. Those were great shows.
Did they do 1911?
You know what? They did do 1911, but they didn't do it as this is again
two different songs.
I'm saying, going back that version that you have.
Two different songs.
It's crazy.
See, Sean, we wrote a song called 1911, and then the Aquarium Reunion have a song called 1911. So they have some lyrics in common, but they're completely different songs.
Totally
interesting. Yeah. Well, that was a great year.
Well, Bruce thought so, and so did Johnny.
Yeah, Johnny. I think Johnny.
1911.
Johnny might have played the presidential inauguration the year after that, or something.
Or that could be Mythocracy.
That's right.
So let's talk a little bit about Bruce's acting career, because the biggie it was when he was in the movie Slave Babe.
Yes. That was Billy Bob knowing who he wanted in that movie. I mean, he knew he wanted Bruce for that part. He had a vision of Bruce wearing, one of those jumpsuits that, as Billy Bob put it, that a pharmacist wears when they go fishing on the weekends. And he said he just had this idea of like the costume that Bruce, as Morris, his character's name, is wearing. But what I think Billy Bob Thornton would tell you is he's really proud of the fact that he wrote, there's the famous lines that Jez spun into a song that you talked about earlier. Well, I think that you guys called it the dots go or something. Whatever.
Dots go where I say they go.
Something like that. And anyway, all of those lyrics are written by Billy Bob. Yep. He wrote that. He wrote it to conjure Bruce, right? He wrote something that he thought Bruce would say. And it really does sound like a song, like a Bruce lyric, right? It, when he starts going off and about the cookies of discontent and and Billy Bob's proud of that. When I interviewed him, because I was asking, I said, people always ask, was that Bruce riffing or was that you? And I'd heard that Billy Bob wrote it. And he says, oh yeah, he says, I wrote that, man. I'm proud to say I wrote that. And it sounded like Bruce.
And remind people what Bruce's role was. I'm trying to remember now.
I will. Yes. Let me set that up for you. The basically the story, without getting into the whole story, it's about a person who's been released from a mental hospital, who's played by Billy Bob Thornton for having committed a violent crime, and one of the main characters is played by Dwight Yoakam, and he is sort of the boyfriend of this family that has sort of adopted Billy Bob's character as a friend. The local person who's intellectually delayed, and they befriend him. But meanwhile, they've got this angry, alcoholic, mean-spirited Dwight Yoakam is sort of running the household, and he has a band. And he's getting angry. I'm going to have the band over. And he invites Bruce and the boys over as his band. And he's got Vic Chestnut also playing a part in the, a great songwriter and singer. So, and actually they're all musicians. And the vision Billy Bob had was he wanted to have a scene of some really good musicians playing some like tedious shit on the porch. And that's kind of what he did. And he's got these guys just playing this round of, music that's surf music from hell. And Bruce is the lead singer just sitting on the porch. And then they retire to the inside where the famous scene that we all know, where Bruce spouts his poetry, and he presents them his new lyrics for the band. And ultimately, basically what happens is they drive Dwight Yoakam's character crazy, and he throws them all out. And it's an emotional kind of scene. And but Bruce is hilarious, and for a lot of people, I think it's the most memorable. Certainly for Bruce fans, it's the most memorable scene in the movie. But
and when was that made? Was it?
It was 96.
Yeah.
That movie was made in 96, and it took, I don't know, maybe a few weeks for Bruce to be on the set. I think they became kind of, friendly. He and Billy Bob were friendly already, and they bonded over this baseball thing. He talked about playing catch on the set with Bruce, and also jamming occasionally. They'd go up to a barn that Billy Bob had somewhere nearby with a lot of instruments, and they just sort of they jam out.
Awesome. And Bruce did a bit of other acting as well, and
yes,
I mean, something fairly recent that I think just came out.
Here Comes Rusty, which we watched a couple weeks ago. And I'd never seen it. We'd never seen it. And it was like a gift. It was a gift of an extra visit with Bruce. It was so much fun to just watch and see him again. And then the kid in that movie, the connection with him and the kid reminded me of W.C. Fields and kids that he acted with. And that kid, who many know, Brandon
Niederauer, yeah.
And the first time we played with him was at BB King's, and the whole flight to New York, Bruce, wait till you hear this kid. I mean, he just loved that kid. And so to see him act with him, it was just very touching, actually, the connection that they had in that film.
Yeah, it was another
Fred Willard was great as well. And Bruce loved Fred Willard.
Yeah.
So highly of him. And they're both.
We'll have to keep an eye out for that. I think that just
you can rent it on
Amazon.
Yeah.
Okay. And what was it called one more time?
Here Comes Rusty.
Here Comes Rusty.
It's a fun movie. It's definitely not Sling Blade, but it's definitely fun. And he was in another movie called Getting It On back in the 80s, 83.
That's a great scene.
It's a great scene. It's the only good scene in the movie. I hate to say it. Sorry.
Isn't that with Jerry Fields?
Yes, Jerry Fields
and Ricky Keller.
Ricky Keller is in it, and Billy McPherson is in it, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Sean, you gotta look that one up. It's wild.
Excellent.
It's
they play. What was it? They hire a band. What was the setup?
Basically, it's a silly teen hijinks
teen
movie.
Exploitation film.
It's a B movie at best. But Bruce's band is like in the middle of it at a party scene, and that's the best scene. Is that to see the late Bronze Age like really going at it, and these ridiculous.
They go to Zambi.
Trying to dance.
They play Zambi music for sure.
Completely Zambi.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, it's coming up on 1 here.
Yes, it's past Jerry and I. It's way past our bedtimes. Yeah. I hope you know that.
I should have started sooner.
No, we're happy to do it.
Yes,
it's been a ball. It's been so much fun.
I think we could go for a few minutes longer and kind of wrap up the slideshow a bit. Kind of take a peek at a few of his other groups and take a peek at his solo albums and different records he's been on as well, real quick here.
Sure.
So, Derek Trucks.
There he is.
Any story behind this particular picture?
Not really. Best I could say is I think it's the Macon Fest. Okay. That was taken by Ron Currens, really real good friend of ours and a great friend of Bruce's. Ron used to publish or edit a magazine called Hitting the Note. Mm-hmm. It was an Allman Brothers focus.
Oh, yeah.
But, great little magazine. And so anyway, this was a photo. I'm pretty sure Ron took this one.
Very cool. Okay. And then, again, the Georgia Theater. Regular stop.
Bobby Lee Rogers. Oh, yep. That reminds me. I had a point. I made a note of something I had to bring up, which is called It's Your Band. Okay. This is one of the rites of passage when you play with Bruce. At some point, he will look at you, usually in the van, and he's going to say, it's your band. So that means it's your band. Do what you want with it. You take this vehicle. So I think this band really did that, the Codetalkers. Didn't they go off on their own and stay together?
Kind of, yeah. It's an interesting story.
It's your band.
I'd like to get to the... Yeah, basically. Essentially, that was it. It was Bobby's band, and it was a band he basically built for Bobby, though, because even when Bruce was in the band, and it was Bruce's band, Bruce didn't write a lot of the songs like he did in other outfits. This was a really different... If you talk to people like, say, Ron Currens and these guys who were always at these shows and stuff, he'd say that this was a band, I think they'd kind of tell you this was a band Bruce kind of built with Bobby Lee in mind. So it might have been one, Jez, where he kind of had that in mind even before, okay, he liked his songwriting and whatever else.
But he wanted that. He wanted people to write. He wanted people to sing, to entertain, to announce, it was show business for him. It was not just, what would you call it? Super Bowl? It was the Super Bowl.
It was the Super Bowl.
It's your band, and you better go on there and make something of it. And I'm giving you this opportunity. It's your band. But
the truth is, the breakup of this band and Bruce's leaving it was not a pretty thing. It was not a happy parting.
Well, it's not always pretty when it's your band.
Well,
or any band. I don't know any band that's pretty.
I have a feeling
that ends well. They don't end well.
Well, this one didn't, and I have a feeling that it hurt Bruce for a long time.
Sometimes it doesn't end well, but the difference, like when I said, Sean, at the beginning that I never planned to play with Bruce, we were just friends. So from my perspective, it was a little different because I came and went, and I was older at the time already, and really was just taking it for what it was and just enjoying the moments. But I can see how there could be hurt feelings because of being in so many bands myself, the way bands end, the way they start compared to when they end, it's very difficult to keep a band together.
Yeah. Well,
you've been in bands. Bands are tough.
I've been in a few. I've even been kicked out of one. So yeah.
We've been through everything in bands. You go, there's so many elements of them. And when it's happening, it's happening. But when it's not happening,
it's better to move on.
Exactly.
It really is.
Anyway, yeah, there's a story there.
It's your band.
One lesson I learned is life is short, so fraternize in as many musical situations as possible.
That's it.
Don't put all your eggs in one band's basket and just play with the same four people.
It's got to feel good. It's got to feel good. Like this band. Sean, you're in a band, right? The ELO thing.
Well, that one, but
I don't know. Your original Story of a Life is your original band, and then you have the yellow tribute thing.
Right, yeah.
And so you all get along. When you're in a band and you all get along, there's nothing like it.
Absolutely.
You're on the same page.
And
inevitably, someone might be on a different page at some point, and that's fine. You just move on.
Sure. There's a lot of different levels. Like I said recently, you can be a pro and just go punch a clock and get a lot of work done.
I don't believe that dysfunction occurs on one level. So I'll just say that about this particular band.
Definitely not. but when you find a group of people that really are your brothers, it goes to a totally different level. And it kind of epitomizes what the word band really means.
Mm-hmm.
And
you know what? And that comes across too. That comes across, off stage, when they're on stage, and when you're watching. And I think these guys killed for a few years. And then when Bruce left the band, something kind of happened where it was like, they didn't last that long. So it wasn't like it's your band and go up. They kind of frittered away. And that was part of the issue. I think it was one of those where maybe Bruce didn't want it to go away as quickly as it. I don't know the whole story. It doesn't matter. They both went on to other things. I do know that this was one of the most difficult, bands. Bruce was in a lot of bands. They all broke up. This was the most difficult one to cover and write about because I think it did hurt Bruce. And I know if you talk with Jeff Mosier a little bit, you'll find out that this was something that bothered him for many years. And I
talked about it much. So I didn't know much about that.
I don't think it was that it ended, but maybe the way it ended that he didn't like. Of course, it had to end, and there are bad feelings. But I think there were, and I don't know what it all was, but I feel like there was a closeness there. You know, sometimes when you're really close with somebody like
who were the other members in that group?
Ted.
Oh, Ted. Yeah, he's
fantastic. And Falcon, Tyler Greenwell.
Oh,
that was the heart of the band. This was This was a killer band, but Nick Buddha was in the band at one point early on.
Really?
Nick, I think Nick was a guy that Bobby Lee brought along early on. You know, because Bruce was asking Bobby, "Who do you like?" You know, and so I have a feeling that there was like, maybe Bruce got a feeling, crap, I shouldn't have said this is your band so quickly. I don't know. But at any rate, they produced some incredible music. You know, all of the guys, except for Bruce, of course, are still playing out there and producing music.
Did they do Give Thanks to Chank? Was that on one of those albums?
That was for the Quark Alliance.
Oh, that's on his solo.
No, that was a band he had called the Quark Alliance.
That's right.
They did Give Thanks to Chank.
I remember that, yeah. This is kind of about when I first saw Bruce, probably with an ARU reunion at Aquarium at Georgia Theater. I don't know, 15 years ago now. Right around that time, I think. Same guitar.
Is that a Strat?
Yeah, it's a Strat.
This is
remember him playing with Strat?
Yeah.
I never playing a Strat.
I guess it's a rare one.
Always played the SG with those engravings in it.
You love that. This is I think this is Codetalkers, and he loved, you know, they did the Suits thing. That was a whole thing where they
from Hubert Sumlin. That was to keep up with Hubert Sumlin.
Yeah, I think Hubert inspired that, and that became their look. That kind of became their thing.
Good look.
I dig that tie.
Yeah.
That's pretty slick. Alrighty. And so which outfit is this?
This is
William Barnes, man.
William.
Fantastic pedal steel player. That guy.
Yeah, William's amazing. This is William and Dwayne Trucks. And is that Kevin Scott? And Bruce. And that's this is, I think, the early version. Yeah, this is Pharaoh Gummitt.
That was the band before the one I joined. And, you know, William played at that night we were talking about, the tribute that we did for Face at that From the Earth Brewery. And William played some of the most killing pedal steel that night. It just blew me away.
William
he played with us at the Vista Room one night. Oh, but that was after Bruce died. That was a tribute, and Denny was there that night, and they played together. That's right.
I hardly recognize Kevin with that little beard.
Yeah.
Pharaoh Gummitt. So what was the story? Tell them the story of Pharaoh Gummitt, what that means. Tell the listeners.
Oh, yeah. It's just a way to pronounce federal government. It's a funny way to pronounce federal government. It's a colloquialism. Pharaoh Gummitt. Like if you're, maybe from South Georgia, I don't trust the Pharaoh Gummitt.
That's awesome.
And
here's a bit of a montage here.
Jez, this one with Bruce and the sock feet. I think you were at that gig. I think that was Mom's. I think it was Mom's.
Yeah, Music on Main. And
love those folks over there.
Yeah, you played there, haven't you, Sean?
I haven't played there, but I've been to a lot of shows.
Yeah, it's a great spot. And
it's cool.
I hope to one day. We'll see.
Wow.
Here's a great one.
Oh, that's that gig in Athens that you came by, Sean. That's the one at the Georgia.
Okay, and Danny Pascal on drums.
There's my keyboard above. Yeah, that's Danny. He did a killer job on drums. Jimmy Dormeyer on guitar. And there's that guitar. And Jimmy was fantastic, still is. And there's Chucky on percussion. Chucky B. Chucky played all our New York gigs with us and a lot of special gigs in town. Played at the Tabernacle.
This was at the Georgia Theater, right?
Yeah.
I took these.
Yeah. That night, I only was playing bass on the keyboard, left-hand bass. I'd never played anything except bass that night because that was the night that I was officially passing the baton to Johnny. And we were Johnny wanted to go on the road. He loved the idea, and his wife had died, and it was a great thing for Johnny. And I didn't really want to be on the road at that point, and at this point as well. But so I just played bass, and Johnny carried the thing. And what it was I got together with Johnny the week before, and I showed him all the grooves. I said, Bruce wants a James Brown groove here. He wants Floyd Kramer vibe on the country. Showed him all the things, and he did literally none of them at the gig or at any gigs. And Bruce loved it, and it was perfect. So anyway, that was a real fun night.
I had the pleasure of meeting Johnny a few years ago. I realized that I was sitting right next to him. I was seeing Joe Gransden's big band over at Cafe 520 or whatever it is over in Sandy Springs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
he was there every Monday night, had his own seat and everything.
Yeah, it's great. You know,
I did a story on, yeah.
I'll show you guys a funny picture. Hold on just a second.
God, Jez, I used
so late. How are we up so late?
I don't know, man.
I've been late since the Bruce days.
I know. That's right. You guys would play late.
I love seeing Joe's band, you know, and just seeing a full, you know, big band setting like that. And it reminded me, my grandfather had his own big band back in the day.
Wow.
A little shot here.
That is cool.
Eddie Tonar still got that banner too, Red Crushed Velvet.
That's so cool.
That is very cool, bro.
His dad was in the military like 100 years ago. He was the bandmaster at Fort Leavenworth.
Whoa.
And, yeah.
He looks like Joseph Stalin's cousin.
I know he does. I wish I could grow a mustache that good, but it'd be mostly gray by now anyway.
Classic.
So anyway, so sorry, I digress. But,
I like the mustache, Sean. That's a good look.
Yeah, well, you know, I got rid of the chin hair because it was all white. It's just making me look. No hurry.
But you got a few years, you know.
Yeah. So. Let's see what else I got here real quick, and then I guess we'll wrap it up pretty quick here. And I thank you both for coming by tonight.
Thanks for
having us, Sean.
Absolutely.
Man, it's great to talk.
Let's see what else we got in here real quick.
Love that picture, Johnny.
Yeah, there's another shot with Johnny there. Is that it?
Mom's.
Yeah, it looks like Mom's. Yeah.
And the IHOP. Nice
mom. The IHOP. Then the IHOP. That's Bruce in two of his elements.
Yes, very much so.
At the office and at lunch.
And who did this?
You know what? I wish I'm in dope because I don't know the name of the artist. I was there at this show and took a picture of the piece of the rock. It was at the Hemlock Festival in Dahlonega.
Those were fun. Those are fun gigs.
Yeah, this was the Hemlock Festival from November 2017. So after Bruce had passed, you know, Johnny played that show.
Right.
And you know, anyway, and they had these gigantic, like, what do you call those? You know, those gigantic puppets that people, you know, carry around. You see them at music festivals. They had a giant Bruce version of it with like this round beach ball type of head, and you could tell it was supposed to be Bruce. And I got a bunch of pictures of that too.
I almost feel like I've seen a picture of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. So that's great art. That totally rocks. And talk a bit about his solo records real quick here and different groups he's been with. Just some
the late Bronze Age was definitely a super group. I mean, this was, as Jez said, it had Jerry Fields in it. It had Ricky Keller.
Billy Hatcher in that one?
Who?
Bill Hatcher?
Yes, Bill Hatcher came on after McPherson left.
Genius.
I mean, this was a super band. I mean, it's like, okay, they lose a Billy McPherson and they get Bill Hatcher. I mean, this was a great band that did some off-the-wall stuff. It got great reviews in the New York Times. Their records, I think they did two records. And, like Robert Palmer himself, you know, called them out in the New York Times with fine reviews, you know, the writer.
Not the singer, Robert Palmer.
Right.
And blues historian, right? Not the singer, the blues writer, and so on. But yeah, he loved this stuff. And what was funny is, Landslide Records, you know, made these. And Michael Rothschild, great guy.
Well, we met him in Florida.
Yeah, he basically
Bernardino.
Right. He's in Florida, and so that's where he is. So he started this company to record these albums, basically. Because Bruce was his friend. He's like, hey, I want to record this stuff, but nobody else will do it. So I'll start a record company. So basically we started a record company to record these records. And he laughed. He said something like, they got great reviews in the New York Times. They still only sold about 5 copies per state, but but there's some real gems on there. And I
love that one, Arkansas.
That's great album. That's a Bruce Hampton solo album with a lot of the guys that, like,
good music. I think, isn't Sonny Emery on some of that?
Yes.
Maybe Paul Barrere might be on there.
I think Paul Barrere, it's got a ridiculous lineup. And this, I think the art here reflects the re-release. They released it. Originally, Arkansas was like a compilation of stuff. I think for a certain, and then he added to it. I think years later, he added another version of it, and that's what
Oliver Wells, I think, plays.
Oliver Wells is on it. Oh God, the song Arkansas has got an interesting story behind it as well. Gary, Buho, Gazway's on it, and he's from Arkansas. And he had mentioned he had gotten a divorce or something, and he was having a bad time. And he says, "Man, I got to get my head together. I seem to have lost control since I left Arkansas or whatever." And that became, I never had much control till I got to Arkansas. That whole thing. It's almost a Manhattan Transfer chorus.
Yeah, it is kind of jazzy. And also Bruce used to say, I never played in Arkansas with him, but he used to say that was his best market, somewhere in Arkansas.
He loved, Arkansas was like 6 for him because, he would talk about how if he loved something, he'd say he hated it, And so like, I remember going to Arkansas to see my daughter once at a music festival, and he was like, "Well, I guess I won't be seeing you again. They're going to kill you." And it was he was like warning me and stuff. I would get texts on the way out there. Watch out, don't go to Ozark. It's like
funny. That's funny.
But he loved Arkansas.
How about this? Yeah.
Jez, you got to talk about this.
That's the one that I had the great opportunity to play on, and really grateful for the writing sessions that we had for this album, which mainly were in our garage here, or in the music room. So we wrote, he had a book of lyrics that he'd been carrying around, I'm sure, for a lot of years and tinkering with. And we just made songs out of them. We did the Grogans. It's About Time the Grogans Have Arrived. We put that together. We did that country tune I mentioned, with the one Billy Bob did those words, ...
Surrender.
We did, Surrender. But what was the other? There's one called Money Man. This was technically supposed to be a blues album. Originally, I think the deal he got, the idea was a blues album. So it's a little more blues based. It doesn't really, I don't know if it reflects that as well. And in fact, some of the songs wound up becoming more, they evolved live. I actually there's versions on the album that he did live at the Vista Room, and I'm not on the album, but several of the songs that I co-wrote are on that album, and I actually like those versions the best. There's a song, Don't Go in That Room. It's good on Pharaoh's, but it's really good on that live at the Vista Room, with Darren on drums and Denny Wally, and who else on that? Tyler. It's just Tyler Neal.
But isn't Johnny Knapp is on Potarth?
He's credited on there. Yeah, we were. Yeah. The sessions.
Isn't Ben Williams on it?
Yeah, and Marlon Patton played on some of it. We did it at his studio. That's where I got to play the electric sitar. Right Now is one of the best songs. But once again, that became more, it evolved in the gigs more. Bruce was obsessed with the song Right Now, an old gospel blues tune. He played us the recording of it. So we were kind of working it out in the studio, and that became one of the main songs of the gigs. So I wouldn't say it's the best versions of these tunes, but some of them, it's a beautiful thing because you get to hear AJ, who I just love playing with AJ, and some of his songs on this album, the title cut. And there's another
Black Cat on the shoulder. That's a good one.
Yeah. So Bruce loved hearing what AJ did on What did he call it? The thing he
Black,
played.
Black Cat on Her Shoulder.
No, what was the instrument he played?
Oh, it wasn't it a pedal
Lap steel.
lap steel?
But he wore it.
Yeah,
so.
he had one that he wore a lap steel that he'd wear like a guitar. But it was funny because he'd have it. He was amazing. Yeah,
he was electric. He was another. I mean, he had that thing, and obviously Bruce saw that in him, and he's still doing great things. So it's a special period. The album is good as a memento of a period of time, and I'm really proud of it for that, and especially of the songwriting collaborations that Bruce.
And that's Bruce's art on the cover.
I had a feeling. Very cool.
He did that on a few albums.
I love this record. I have that vinyl for sure. I love that one.
There's the other Late Bronze Age.
That's
and, this was the first one, I think. And this got great reviews in the Times, of course. And this was one that that Landslide released. That's Billy McPherson, I think? Or is that Ricky Keller? No, it's Billy. And great album, again, filled with some weird stuff. Occasionally, you hear songs. I'll hear a song. There have been times, and I'll listen to a Bruce record, and it'll come to a song, and the minute it comes on, the second it comes on, I'll go to the next one, right? Because it's like, oh wait, I don't want to listen to the sound effect of the dolphins fucking now, that kind of. Because he'll do some crazy sound effects, but they're all worth listening to. It's like I'll listen to it the first time, and I'll get what I want out of it, and then I'll listen to it again a few years later, and my appreciation for those songs grows over time. When at first I was like, what the hell was he thinking when he did this? But this is, this and his solo album, one of his first albums. It's just some stuff on this one here, One Ruined Life of a Bronze Tourist. It's got half of it is his comedy routine, and it's hilarious.
Does that have The Roof of My Mouth?
Yes. Yes.
That's a really good one.
It's it. It is. So again, you have to like, oh, okay, some of this is real right on music, and some of it is just comedy of a kind that only Bruce did, and maybe occasionally Andy Kaufman, that kind of thing. But Bruce was, one of a kind. Oh, there it is, Hampton 70. And that album, by the way, the title of that album, Flournoy Holmes came up with that because they misunderstood each other on the phone. And Bruce said what the title was, and Flournoy said, One Ruined Life of a Bronze Tourist. And Bruce said, that's perfect. So that became
very cool.
Oh, and band names. You should mention real quick, band names. Part of the activity of driving around a band looking for gigs is trying to come up with new names for the band. Right?
I want to hear them. So
that band, Pharaoh's Kitchen, it was called that for a while, but it actually became Realms of Ventilation, not ventilation.
Heard of that.
It had to have no T. Realms of Ventilation. But it never took off. We'd go to clubs and they'd call us Pharaoh Gummitt. They'd call us Pharaoh's Kitchen, but our name was Realms of Ventilation, but it just never took off. So
we had a lot of those like side projects to the Egyptian windmill operators.
What about the Fiji Mariners?
Yeah, that was a good one.
That's Dr. regular band. Yeah, that was his full-time band. Dr. Dan Matrazo
and Marcus Williams on drums. He's great drummer. Love Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we all wound up at his 70th birthday party.
Were you there, Sean?
I was. It's funny. I guess I was just destined to be there. Like the universe provided an opportunity and I took it. My friend Critter had a couple extra tickets, and me and my friend Adrian nabbed him up and went. And
Adrian Ash?
Yeah, Adrian Ash. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was great. And we'd be talking about that night of music for a long time to come anyway, because there was so many great things that happened that night. And, none of us had a clue what really went down, we just figured, Bruce has his antics on stage. So we just kind of assumed he was goofing,
Yeah.
And didn't really realize what had happened until, we were home, I guess. Any memories before the end, I guess?
I wasn't there at the end of the night. We were there I had lunch with Bruce at the diner, which was a sub lunch from the IHOP. And me and Bruce would meet at the diner sometimes Fridays, usually every other Friday. So we had a lunch, just me and him. And he invited us to the gig. I said, oh, yeah, sure, we'll come. It'd be great. And we were there, but we had to leave early. And when we got home, and what my favorite part was actually Chuck Lavelle when he played Jessica.
Yeah.
So
Oh, wow.
also Oliver Woods said, I mean, there was a lot, and Mosier was amazing. But we had to leave, and we got a call from the wife of one of the other musicians. And we thought, and she said, did you hear what happened? We thought it was Johnny. We thought, oh no, something happened to Johnny. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of a surprise because we didn't expect that to happen to Bruce. But what better way to go out, right? All the love. And he felt that love, and he still feels that love. Yeah. Jerry, you got your perspective because you were there the whole night.
Yeah, that was a crazy night. I was with Johnny and Jim Basile that night. Mm-hmm. They were giving me a ride. I was staying in the hotel in town that night because I had to be at work at Georgia Tech the next morning really early. So we were hanging out with Johnny back at the Georgian Terrace after they took Bruce away, right? And we were like, but we were all convinced he was okay. You know, all right, you know, he'll be fun. We're going to see him at lunch again, this kind of thing. So Jim Basile went and got the car, and we got Johnny in the car, and they were driving me down Peachtree on our way to the hotel. And I'll never forget, we were at the stoplight of where I think was where 10th crosses Peachtree, and we got the call from Zambi, from the hospital that Bruce had passed. And, you know, it was just, we couldn't believe it. You know, we couldn't believe anything, but that night was so surreal as it was, but it was kind of heartbreaking, of course. And it was a weird night. My car got broken into. It was just a funky, weird night all around. And as Sean said at the top, we were going to remember this show for any number of reasons. This was going to be one to remember and to put in the books. I mean, look at the lineup you have here on the picture. I mean, we were going to be talking about this show for years. And so Bruce didn't have to do what he did to make it memorable. And I don't think for a minute that, you know, even though, yes, it's the way you want to go. And it's the way he said it. He said it at lunch. He said it a number of times. Many times. He's not the only musician who ever said that, or performing artist who ever said, I want to die on stage. You know, that's it. But he said it. And then when it happened, you know, of course, people were like, well, he picked it and he predicted it. And I don't think for a minute Bruce chose, like, I want to die tonight. It just was the opportune time. He's surrounded by all this love, all of some of his favorite musicians, all of his friends, and all of these things. You couldn't ask for a better.
He felt that love of the audience, and
you couldn't ask for a better way to say, you know, to say goodbye.
It filled him completely.
But all of that to say is, when you think about who Bruce was, he didn't like to be he wouldn't want it. He would prefer to play a small place than a Fox, right? And so this was all out of the ordinary. The whole night was. And so it was magic. You know, there it is.
You know, the next morning, I drove over to Johnny's house. I don't know if you remember, Jerry. Once we heard the news, because I thought he was going to make it when I went to sleep that night. And some of the guys were at, I forget where, some club waiting for the after show.
Yeah.
Bruce asked me to play the after show, and I didn't want to.
Terminal West had a show, an after party.
Yeah, and so Chucky and some of the guys, we were talking, and we were all hoping he was going to make it. So in the morning when I heard the news, I just got in the car and drove over to Johnny's and woke him up and said, we got to call a lunch. We went on Facebook Live and called an emergency lunch. And remember that? People came from all over to the IHOP, and we celebrated Bruce that day.
That was brutal. And I mean, that was great, but what was brutal was this, you know, like anything else, the suddenness of it, because, you know, Bruce was such a bigger than life kind of person.
And he still is.
Well, he still is. He's beyond that now. Mm-hmm. But I'm talking about when you're there at lunch, you're stealing your turkey sausages and then telling stories about seeing John Lennon backstage. It was just such a sudden thing. And I think that, you know, what happened was, for a while there, the band tried playing at the Vista West, at the Vista Room. They did. But I went
for a month. Yeah, 1 month.
It went like this because the guys, I think, like Bruce would have told them, you got to go do your own thing now. You really need to head out. And you could feel that. The first night, there was the spirit, the emotion. But by the second week, you could feel that it was like, it's, the joyful noise has left the band. We need to go find our own joyful noise. I mean, that's the way Jimmy Herring put it.
No, that was a good way to put it. It was really great to pay tribute in that way. And for me, I had been doing a steady Thursday gig, so I was unable to go to the Vista Room and participate in any of those shows.
I remember.
But then after he passed, my gig happened to end that same week, one of those symmetry things. So I offered to come and play with Tyler and Darren and some of the guys. And it was really healing for me personally. The first one, especially. And Denny came, very healing. But I see what you're saying, because we did it each week. And each week there was more sadness, it seemed like.
Denny didn't come back. Denny came back for the first set the second week and then went home.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I can see why.
It was just her. He just said it didn't feel. He says, I loved what they were doing and trying to do, and it had to be done. He says, but it was just hurting. He couldn't do it, and so he left. But it was nice though just to see it. It was nice. I think it was like that's why it's nice for people to get together, and that was cool because I think it made the artists also feel like we can keep going.
And then Tyler's doing his own thing, and he's doing great. It's his band.
It's his band. He's got his own band now, and I think Frainer was in the band with him. So that's a great thing. It moves on. It just keeps going.
That's right.
And that's I believe that is an Andy Estes special. That is
Andy.
That's a beautiful photo.
Great.
Where is it?
This was, Bruce. I'll be the first to admit I was late. You guys knew of Bruce probably better than I did a longer time ago, right? This is where I got to know Bruce. Was at the Sawtee Jamboree.
Oh yeah.
Up here in Sawtee, Georgia.
Oh yeah.
A festival of 200 or 300 people. And so that's how our paths happened to cross, completely accidental.
What year was that?
The first one I saw him at was 2007. This one I think is 2009. He was at that. He came to most of them. Him, Mosier, and Bruce was at most. We're at most of these Sawtee Jamborees.
Were you at the one where Peter Rowan played?
Yes, that was.
I heard good things about that.
That was an amazing show. That was my favorite. We did 10 Sawtee Jamborees. That was my favorite. Close second was the Indigo Girls came one year. So that was mind-blowing too.
Cool.
Well, gentlemen, I have thoroughly.
I bet even you're getting tired now, Sean, right?
Well, this year I've had a really weird schedule. I sleep till about 4 and I stay up till 5.
And you got the Dr. Pepper, which is cool, which I love on your show.
Yeah.
I used to be a pepper. I stick with coffee.
I'm hooked on this. I could drink wine and go right to bed, though.
I switched from pepper to coffee like in about 1981.
That's a big-ass cup.
I like the pepper.
You'd have to get up and get seconds anytime soon, do you?
Well, the problem is if it goes cold. So, that's the only issue. But you got to percolate for that. You keep it on low on the percolator, but that's
exactly.
You go into on coffee episode maybe.
Well, I just wanted to mention that next week we are talking about Frank Zappa.
I'm excited to watch that.
Yeah.
Wait to see it.
And I'm trying to remember the names of the 3 texts that will be.
Thomas Nordegg is one of them. I think.
Thomas Nordegg, Bob Rice, and Merle Saunders Jr.
Wow.
Yeah, that's quite the lineup.
Yeah, it's great.
I think your whole lineup for the month is fantastic, and really enjoy the archives of the shows. And like I said, I'm working my way through them, and you're doing great work. Keep it up.
And really honored to be on it too. Thanks, Sean. This is thank you big time. First one of the year. Very nice.
Thank you both for being part of it.
Great way to start the year.
Yeah.
I want to give everybody a pinky handshake and avoid eye contact.
No eye contact.
That's right.
All right, signing off.
Okay, you guys take care. I'll see you all next week.